No frost in the methane tank.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
Our chamber pressure looks good.
Toggling up. Roger roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly!
They go down to nominal.
Flight outside SC off. Putting in SC off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Alright everybody, welcome to live coverage of propellant load testing with the full Starship stack down in Starbase. Sorry about the quick delay to our intro there, but we got it rolling, and now we are live for propellant load testing down in Starbase. Let me know if you can hear us now and see a side-by-side view of Ship 24 up close on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, the full stack of the vehicle down on the orbital launch site in Starbase. And now I'm getting 5x5s in chat, so much appreciated. Thanks for sticking with us there for a second. All good now. We're coming to you live because, as you can see, if you look towards the bottom of the booster on that right-hand side, you'll see some frost on the vehicle. You can even see some vapors underneath the rocket. That is our indication that propellant loading is underway, and even that top tank on the booster seems to be getting a little bit of a frost ring. So both, and I get rudely interrupted by a vent, as per usual around here. But propellant loading underway under both tanks of the booster. We'll have to keep an eye on the ship, see if that gets involved as well. Nothing there yet. But we do have a vent from the tower. That could mean some things. We're going to go into detail about what all of this means here in a second. But we'll be bringing you updates throughout today's testing. My name is Thomas Burkhardt. I'm the news director here at NASASpaceflight, and I'll be offering some commentary today. I'm not alone on the stream either, though. We've got Alex on commentary as well. Alex, how are you doing today?
Well, apart from hot miking, I'm doing good.
Happens to the best of us, Alex, no worries. But thanks for hopping on. You have got some expertise to share with us today, and so why don't you just start with a brief overview of what we're looking at. We've got two tanks getting frosty. We got some vents from the tower. There's some vents on the ground. What do we know about what's going on right now?
Yeah, so today it seems like we're basically seeing loading of propellants on board the full stack of Starship. We've seen first the booster. We see there the tower vent. More on that in a second, but mostly the indications that we usually look for when they're going into propellant load is those kind of vents that they do for purging and chilling down the lines. In this case, the ones that we actually see venting are related with the liquid oxygen. In the case of the OLM vent, that happened, I think it started about an hour ago, and then it stopped about 20 minutes ago or something like that. And that's when we got an indication that lux load was starting. And yeah, activity from the subcoolers on the methane side also indicated that methane load was also underway. And so as we can see there, both tanks on the booster are frosty right now. And so that's what we think it's going to happen now with the Starship, with the ship. The tower is venting right now. That is also related probably with the same thing, but for the ship instead of the booster. And once that tower vent stops, we might see some frosty ship.
Frosty ship, I like it. Yes, I mean, we can also keep an eye on that Q-D arm, right? So the arm that's kind of about halfway up the vehicle, not the chopstick arms, but I believe we'll even see those lines maybe get a little bit of frost and a little bit of vapor if they get cold, and that could be an early indicator before the frost actually appears on the vehicle, right?
Yes, that could actually be the case here. We actually saw on the previous testing of the full stack some vapors coming out from the pipes going to the Q-D. So that's definitely something that we could look for. It seems like the tower vent stopped, so that might be an indication that lux load is underway on the ship.
All right, gotcha.
Might be.
Might be,
That's a
yes.
huge emphasis there.
So
We're
yeah,
still kind of learning the whole
let
thing.
me add
but
that
yeah.
caveat then, because this is the first time in a while we've gotten some propellant loading testing, especially there at the orbital launch site, and we've seen them do a lot of work like plumbing work and rerouting maybe some things, and basically there's definitely room for things to have changed, and so the normal visual indicators might not all mean the exact same thing they used to, or they might not all happen. So obviously we'll give you our best informed guess, and the more tests that we see, the more we learn and the more we know exactly how the procedures go. But the clearest indicators, of course, there is frost on the vehicle itself. So we know propellant loading has already started and there is propellant on board the vehicle.
Yeah.
And are we confirmed that this is not like a nitrogen proof test or something? Like these are actual methane and liquid oxygen, right?
Yeah, the subcoolers for the methane side of the tank farm are very active today. We can see
Yep.
there on the right side. They're definitely loading methane on this vehicle, and it makes sense because they have already done that before. It's just
Sure.
going a step further from that. In this case, this might be the first time we see all 4 tanks being loaded at the same time. The
Yeah.
booster has 2, the ship has 2. In previous times, we saw either only liquid oxygen being loaded on both vehicles or only liquid methane being loaded. Today might be the first time we see both tanks on both vehicles being loaded. Whether that'll be a full load or partial load, we don't know. I guess we just have to stick around, right? And keep looking.
Right. Also, you said there are 4 tanks, but don't both vehicles also have a header tank? So isn't it what? I just want to be
That is
precise. I don't
true.
want to.
Okay, 4 main tanks.
4 main tanks. All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, we're also going to dive into some questions. So everyone, if you've got questions, tag us at NASASpaceflight, and you're already doing that. I've already got questions in the queue. There's going to be a ton of them because there's a lot of interest going on. So we'll try to answer as many as we can. And before we dive into that, I also want to introduce a third voice that is joining us on commentary. I believe we have Mr. Chris Gebhardt, Assistant Managing Editor here at NASASpaceflight. Chris, you with us?
Oh, I am indeed. It's a Starbase testing day, but yes, I'm a little late because I had to finish up something really cool about another mission. So yes.
Yeah, potential written news coverage coming to NASASpaceflight.com later today or something. I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, thank you, Chris, for hopping on
Exactly.
and joining us.
Something literally
Oh,
cool.
and literally cool. Exactly. Exactly,
geez.
Alex.
Geez.
Very good.
All
No,
right, here we go.
I'll give that bad joke because it works for both Starship and what I wrote about, so that works. Yes.
All right. Well, on that note, propellant loading underway under the booster. We'll keep an eye on the ship, see if that ship gets frosty too. And while that all happens, let's dive into some questions about what's going on with today's testing, what we're expecting. Also, I do want to acknowledge the fact that it is pretty windy out there. You can see the vapors whipping around the rocket. The cameras are shaking a little bit, depending on which cameras we're looking at. It's a very windy day out there, but doesn't appear to be stopping testing or anything. All right, let me dive into some questions here. Rocket Man Andrew with perhaps the $1 million question, or a variant of the $1 million question. Maybe this is like the $100,000 question or something. When do we think we'll see the 33 engine static fire test? That's not what we're expecting today, right?
No, not what we're expecting today. We can definitely say that. We're hopefully expecting wet dress rehearsal today, and we're hoping for full stack wet dress rehearsal. But in terms of the 33 engine static fire, so there are a couple of different ways that this is actually answered, and they're important for understanding the context of it. From a strict like engineering timeline perspective, if everything goes to plan, when is the earliest they could conceivably do it? Probably from a technical standpoint, late January is still on the table or hasn't completely been taken off. But in all likelihood, with the normal slips and stuff that you end up having in these final test campaigns, I'm going to say first week in February, early February in that regard for the 33 engine static fire, which would still leave them time to do the which would still leave them time to do all of the things that they need to do to then get ready and get back into that potential posture to launch, which according to Elon, in response to a tweet from NASASpaceflight Actual yesterday, basically confirmed that late February or early March was a good estimate at this point for the orbital flight attempt. So
All right, yeah. And to be very clear, a couple people asking the very specific question of, is there an overpressure notice today? No, there is not. That's the big indicator that no engine testing is planned today, only propellant load testing. And you mentioned a wet dress rehearsal, Chris, and I think this is another delineation that we should probably make, because a wet dress rehearsal, which is common across the industry, this isn't just a Starship thing or anything, that is where you go through basically the entire countdown procedure, minus some things that are specific to a launch attempt. So obviously you're not going to light any engines or anything like that. But usually it's the normal fueling timeline you would use for a launch, with whatever holds you may have or something like that. But it's a complete propellant loading of the vehicle, things like that. And that is different from like a partial propellant load test, should that come up. And we don't know which of those is happening today, right? You said we're hoping for a wet dress rehearsal. But it's also possible that this first test could be like a partial fill or something, right?
Well, that and more my hedge on the potential was in case something trips them up and they're not able to complete it.
Yes.
Was more that. But yes, the only thing I would add to your wonderful description there of what a wet dress rehearsal ideally is that sometimes you do on purpose deviate from the normal countdown to test things like, what if we're at this point in the countdown and we have to hold unexpectedly? Like, let's actually test the procedures of how we hold, how we handle all of this stuff with rapid load and go fueling procedures like Starship will employ, just like the Falcon 9. So they could do some other sorts of like hold tests that are off nominal. That could be the only other added part of a wet dress rehearsal, very similar to like what we saw with SLS. Right, where they did the full wet dress. Well, they planned to do the full wet dress rehearsal. Let's back that up. But the plan for the full wet dress rehearsal was that they would actually go down into the terminal count, simulate problems that would force them to hold, so that they could actually verify and validate what holding at different parts in the count with a fully fueled rocket, partially pressurized for flight, would end up doing to the system. So you can use wet dress rehearsals for that type of testing as well.
Right.
And it's also important to mention though that it's also different a tanking test from an actual wet dress rehearsal, I will say.
Yes.
And SLS is an example of that, because they did wet dress rehearsals, but then they did a tanking test between launch attempts. And the tanking test was just basically testing the fueling of the rocket rather than the whole countdown sequence. So that's also another thing to distinguish between, just loading propellants on the vehicle and doing the whole thing.
Right, and as often goes with Starbase testing, especially recently, like oftentimes SpaceX will confirm at the end of a test, like, oh, we did this many engine static fire or something like that. Like, it's very possible that after a day of testing, and we've been speculating all day, SpaceX will go, okay, this is what it actually was. They'll call it a propellant load test or a wet dress rehearsal or something, which might give us one final clue as to what exactly they were doing. and that'll help us track the progress at the end of each day as well. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. But for now, we do have to speculate ever so slightly because we don't know exactly what other procedures they may be doing. Like countdown procedures will have, all right, we're going to put the spacecraft on internal power or all these other things. Whereas tanking tests, they might not bother with those kind of things.
Yeah, exactly.
And unfortunately, the only thing that has an obvious visual indicator is what tanks got frosty, which could mean a couple different things. So we'll do with what we got.
Well, and sometimes they put propellant in the vehicle and the tank doesn't even get frosty.
Right.
So with the methane sometimes. So that's also a possibility.
Yeah, those partial fills where they only fill, the dome or something, that can be tricky. But based on, the boosters so far, we can see pretty obvious frost rings. So they're definitely not this isn't the minimum fill that they did for some static fire tests. Like, well, we're only going to fire the engine for a couple seconds, so it doesn't matter. This is definitely more aimed as a propellant load test because they're loading more significant amounts of propellant.
Yes.
And on that front, we do have some other questions coming in here. We also get a bunch of super chats and stuff, and I'm going to try my darndest to keep up with all of this. It's a name that I'm not sure I can pronounce. MJ said, or didn't say anything, but says, I want to say thanks for becoming a Padre member. So we appreciate that support. And we'll answer some questions in here as well, because Nick asks, I assume they're just loading liquid nitrogen in the tanks now. No, they've done that before. Nitrogen is obviously an inert substance, so they can do not propellant load, they can do fluid loading testing, proof testing on vehicles without any risk of an explosion or anything, because if anything pops or a leak forms, you're just releasing nitrogen, which doesn't combust or anything. But today we saw the methane GSE spooling up the ground support equipment, and that indicates that they are in fact loading actual propellants and not just nitrogen into the tank. So no, this is an actual propellant load test.
Yes, I would agree with that. I do want to point out one thing that we're seeing here is that Alex, are you back with us? What's the venting that we started seeing from the tower there?
Yeah, so we're seeing. Oh, hold on. I'm seeing some venting. Can we switch to south, please?
Starbase testing happens so quickly. We got to switch camera views mid-explanation. There you go.
Yes, exactly.
No, the other one. The other side.
Your other side.
The other side.
Other left. Oh. Other south.
There we go. So you see that venting from
Oh.
the side of the booster? That is related with the engine chills on
I was going to say, that looks like
on the
located
ship.
for an engine shield, isn't it?
Yep.
So
It's weird that it only happens on this side though, or maybe I didn't see the other side properly. But yeah, I was actually about to comment on the fact that both OLM and tower vents are active, and that usually means that whatever loading was happening on those vehicles, it stopped. And so it seems like it might be stopped, but if the ship has been loaded with a little bit of oxygen or something like that, that might be what is producing that engine chill pipe vent from there.
So another
go
question.
ahead.
Another question in this realm for you, Alex. We saw during the SLS campaign, right, that NASA was having to pause fueling on certain things if other fueling things weren't, or parts weren't going perfectly to plan, because it's not just a matter of you can totally just put whatever propellant necessarily into the bottom part of your rocket before you start fueling the upper part, because you're also considering thermal conditions, thermal contraction, thermal expansion based on different elements of how the vehicle is heating and cooling. Have we seen in the past full cryo loads a staggering where the booster has to be X% filled, and then we normally see the ship start to fuel? And could we potentially be at a point where they're trying to get the ship fueling part going, so they've paused booster fueling?
But it seems like both are paused right now. So to me, and especially after seeing that engine chill pipe vent, it will appear to me that they are maybe either on a plan hold where they are doing that testing on the ship, which could be a total thing here. They're doing a tanking test. They are totally able to just hold and see hey, we're gonna be doing this test right now in the sequence. That could be a thing. But it might also be that they are done for it's not going to be rising up more than that. That could also be a possibility here, but it's definitely interesting that we saw that venting, because it means that there's something going on there that they are testing right now. So yeah, what for those that might not know or might be new to this, the engines have to be chilled down prior to ignition. Obviously, for the ship, the engine chill vents used to be on the leeward side, on the side without heat shield tiles, and there were two vents, one on each side, one on the left, one on the right, and ever since a couple of months ago, they have installed what appears to be like two pipes coming down the sides from those vents. And on the suborbital tank farm, on the suborbital pads, they had like pipes that went like extended from there and went out and basically put out that engine chill bleed that is called the gaseous oxygen coming out from the engine. It was bleed out from the engines through those pipes. In the case of here on the ship stack on the booster 7 came out with two pipes at the top, and those two pipes also coincide with the pipes that are on the ship. And so it appears that they used a little bit of the booster to help guide that engine chill vent. And it's definitely new. We didn't see this on the previous full stack testing. So seeing it tested now might be one of those steps in kind of preparing the full stack for that flight later down in the year.
And that coincides with those tests that Chris mentioned earlier. When you're doing a propellant load test or where you're doing a wet dress rehearsal even, you can add a little bit of extra testing here and there if you need other things tested, and that certainly falls within that envelope as well.
Especially if they are just... Yeah, I was just thinking that, especially if what the only testing is filling the tanks without really going through a countdown sequence per se, they can probably just hold, keep the propellants on board at the level they are, and then keep loading out at any point later, or or do whatever they want.
Also, before we bring in our next question, I want to circle back to something that you mentioned earlier. There's the vent on the tower you can see on this camera view, this kind of on the right-hand side, just below where the ship Q-D arm is, and there's also some venting from the actual launch mount near the bottom, because that's where the booster connections are. And would it be right to equate those two things to like very similar to actually the 20-minute vent that we're used to with Falcon 9, where they're purging lines when they're not fueling, and then when the vent stops, that's the indicator that they're actually flowing propellant into the vehicle? Is that the same thing?
That is probably, yeah, that is actually what we think happens on Falcon 9 and also here on Starship. That is actually one of the indicators for methane. So those vents are linked to oxygen. That's more or less what we think. Basically, by looking at all the pipe distribution and things like that, and also the timings of when things happened, and then like one vent stops and suddenly we see liquid oxygen, getting frosted over and things like that. So those are they are clearly indicators of that, and reminds us of all of the Falcon 9 experience that we have already with the T-minus 20-minute vent and all of that.
There you go. Alright, well, yeah, as you can see, the propellant levels are definitely kind of holding right now, and it doesn't look like they're actively loading, but that could be a planned test, they could be in an unplanned hold. We'll keep an eye and see if loading starts up again. But the testing is underway, and I'm going to bring in some more questions and things. We do have a super chat here from Moldy Space Industries that says, feels like the days of old watching a tank fill up and then drain. Makes me miss the camera battery hot swaps. Well, we don't miss the battery hot swaps, if I'm being honest. But thanks for the Thomas Fan Club super chat there. Appreciate it. Also want to give a big thank you to Jonathan Sargent, who became a launch director member. That is a very generous level of support. We hope you appreciate and enjoy all of the benefits that come from the membership program, and just a huge thank you for sending support our way. We appreciate that. Let's bring in another question here. Andrew's got one that asks, is the roadblock in the new location today or back at the old place? Yesterday, we noticed that the roadblock moved slightly, right, Alex? There was like a slightly different clear zone?
Yeah, and it's actually weird because then it came back to the old spot. So that probably was also an indicator that things were spooling down. And they actually opened the road like within a few hours afterward. Yeah, so we think the new roadblock, well, not we think, we actually have had eyes on that roadblock, and it's approximately sort of where some mountain boulevard it's located, right there in the village. It appears that people can actually enter the village. Like it's not blocking that road that goes into the village. It's just not at the usual spot where the London Bean Johnson, I think it is, the boulevard there, right back more to the closer to the launch site, down the road.
Gotcha.
It's
Thanks.
a little bit further away, but if you look on Google Maps, it's only like 400 meters further away from the launch pad. It's not really that huge of a difference if you actually do the calculation.
I'm hearing some venting. You can hear the sounds of a starship in the background there. That sometimes those are useful. You know, if we see a big vent or something, that can sometimes be an indicator that they're depressing tanks and stuff like that. But that was just a short one. That doesn't really mean much. What other questions we got? We got a question here from Mike who asks, do they need to fully fill the booster in order to support the weight of a fully loaded ship? That kind of ties in earlier too about the thermal constraints that SLS was talking about as well, where you only want to reach a certain propellant load level before you start filling the ship or vice versa. Do we know of any like weight requirements as far as like, I mean, I don't know if we have those hard numbers, right?
Interesting to note, though, that just because there's liquid on the tank, it doesn't mean that it's gonna support the weight of the thing on the top.
Sure.
Because if you think about it, the liquid cannot really reach the top of the tank. You always kind of leave a little bit of a bubble for the ullage, for the vapor that it's coming out from the actual liquid. And that is important to point out, because sometimes, and we actually seen this before, they loaded the methane tank on Booster 7 almost entirely without the liquid oxygen being loaded at all. And people were like, oh, it's gonna crumple. It crumples only if you depress the bottom tank.
Right.
Pressure is actually what keeps those tanks firmly, without crumpling and things like that. It's not the liquid that they have inside, it's the pressure on the tanks. And so what you actually need is that pressure. We can see some of that venting here from the engine shield pipes going on again. That's a good sign, I guess, that things
and
are
that
happening.
tower vent has stopped as well, so that kind of coincides with potential resume. Maybe they are starting to load the ship a little bit more.
Yeah. It is also true, because some people in the chat might be like, well, actually, Alex, it is also true that in the case of this steel, for example, when it is cold, it basically is stronger. So it's true that maybe if you load it with cryogenics and things like that, it might actually support better the weight and all of that. But still, it's not really the liquid inside what actually supports the weight on top. It's the pressure on the tank what supports the thing on top. And again, we've seen previously on previous full stack testing that they have loaded the ship, they have loaded the methane tank, and the liquid oxygen tank on the booster was not really, it was okay. And we actually saw that once they unloaded the methane tank, we saw like a big depress vent from the oxygen tank, and people were like, but they haven't loaded the liquid oxygen tank, right? But it is all related with that, with actually sustaining the weight of that methane on the top.
Right, gotcha. Thanks for detailing that for us. Want to speedrun some super chats and questions that we've gotten in here as well. Simon, thanks for becoming a Pad Rep member. We greatly appreciate that. Also, Ollywood became a Pad Rep member, so thank you both for joining that. And oh my goodness, here's a name we've seen before. Robert Hobson gifted 50 Red Team memberships. That's a lot of memberships. That's a lot of support.
Wow.
Robert, we've seen your name in chat many times before. Thank you so much for your continuing support. And if anyone received a Red Team membership from Robert's donation there, please thank him in chat. That is a huge amount of support, and we really, really do appreciate it.
It's nice seeing that engine shield pipes. Not gonna lie, I really like that venting.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a new thing. Bringing another question here as well. James has a question. What are the chances they paint SpaceX on the boosters in the future, looking like Falcon 9 boosters? Chris, you think these boosters are going to get a paint job in the future?
I guess never say never, but I'd lean toward no. It seems like an. I mean, they could, because like when the Falcon 9s get painted and you see their livery, they don't clean them each time they're used to freshen up their livery. So, and the fact that they're not paint, and any paint you add is a mass hit. I mean, it's negligible comparatively, yes, but it is a mass hit. So I'd honestly say no. I think what you see is what you're going to get to some degree.
Because, I mean, remember, they did add, like, the small SpaceX decal and the Ship 24 number, like, on the ship itself. Like, and maybe that's just all we'll get.
Yeah, and, like, maybe the booster serial numbers will still be on them somewhere like that. But, like, I wouldn't expect, like, a huge, gigantic, swooshing X.
Yeah, okay. We'll have to see. But, yeah, I think I'm on your side there.
It's also hard to put anything on the booster without the frost covering it, because the booster is like entirely tanks. Whereas on the ship, they have the nose cone, and that's actually where they have, you know, the Ship 24 and SpaceX logo.
And that's the payload section that won't get frosty, right?
Yep, exactly. I think I saw the drone before, and people are actually putting that out on
oh yeah,
chat.
SpaceX drone in the air.
Yep, right up there at the top.
Gotcha. Got a super chat here from David saying, when do we get to the hydrogen leak? Hopefully Elon has a few red shirts lying around to send the interns out. Bad joke.
I appreciate the red shirt joke from Star Trek, yes. However, if there's a hydrogen leak today, we've got bigger
Yeah, then I am very curious.
I'm confused.
Yeah, very confused where you get hydrogen here. Alan says, hello from Matten Island in Ireland. Hello, thanks for tuning in.
Actually, just one, like 10 seconds. I just want to go back to the previous one real quick. The joke there that we're saying is SLS, the partner to Starship in the Artemis program, had a series of hydrogen leaks that they worked through. The reason we would be massively surprised if there was a hydrogen leak today is because no hydrogen is in any way involved as a fuel with Starship. It's all methane and oxygen. So that's why, just in case there's someone new watching. Yes.
Yes. Good to clarify. Thank you, Chris.
The only hydrogen here is the atoms of hydrogen on the on the methane molecules.
Yeah, and in the ice, in the ice.
True. There you go. That's a very good point. Let's see. David Hall, thanks for becoming a Capcom member as well. Much appreciated as well. Let's see. Let's see here. Oh, here's a question from Beardy Dave. Yes. Do you see them stabilizing the stack with the chopsticks right up to ignition, since it looks like the claw TM is gone for good? Keep up the good work. So referring to, there were some like stabilization arms on the Q-D arm, that arm you actually see in this camera view, previously, that they have now removed. Wondering if maybe the chopsticks could take up that role. What do you think? That was an open question to anybody.
I mean, I guess the chopsticks could provide some degree of vehicle stabilization as well. And I sort of like what we're seeing now. I mean, I think that is a question that is still outstanding, right, Alex? Is exactly what is the chopstick configuration for countdown? We know they have to open for liftoff, but yeah, that's a good question. When in the latter part of the count would they potentially open for liftoff? Yeah, or do they provide that support? I think that's one of the things that we're still waiting to sort of discern, right, Alex?
I'm pretty sure it's gonna work sort of like the Stromback for Falcon 9, where they pressurize the tanks for Stromback retraction, and they hook the claw on the top and things like that, and it's only held down by the bottom.
Right.
I think that's possibly the thing that we're gonna see here. Yeah. Where basically the chopsticks will open like a few minutes before liftoff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Alright, what else do we got as far as questions here?
Really cool, you can even see like the pipe frosty. You can
Yeah.
see
Oh,
it
yeah.
white.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the pipe on the actual vehicle, right? The engine choke pipe.
Yeah. So there's like a pipe on the ship, but it's also like hooked up to two pipes that they put on on the booster at the top, one in this side and one on the other side. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really cool. I didn't know I would like them so much. I don't know why.
Alex is becoming the engine chill vent's #1 fan right now.
I mean, that's also interesting because it clearly crosses the separation plane of the two portions of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
vehicle, and that to me is very fascinating, considering the last update we got on how how the booster and ship will actually separate during flight. I now have questions about what that interface is at the booster ship.
Yeah.
My thinking, just basically looking at the pictures by Jack, by the way, if you are a member, you should look that up, because I think Chris actually uploaded those. There's a picture of the ship from below once they were stacking it on the booster, and you can see the pipes on the sides, and it appears that it's just basically like both pipes just touch each other, and the engine chill just goes through. It seems like it's just basically not connected physically, like it just goes through. But it might also be that there's some actual physical connection. I'm not fully sure, but it doesn't seem like there's any sort of claw or pin or whatever like we see for the holding mechanism between the ship and the booster. Yeah, so there's no separation mechanism between both, but there's obviously some holding mechanism to be able to keep them together during flight. But just like you keep the booster hooked up to the OLM before it flies and things like that, the ship is hooked up to the booster before it goes off on its own flight separately. That's sort of the idea, that once those hooks open, the engine shut down on the booster, it does the kick thing, and the ship just flies away. That's sort of the thinking here. So the same thing could be for the engine chill pipes. They are just right next to each other. That is probably what it appears to be here.
Yeah. Also, I mean, it's worth mentioning that so the point of an engine chill vent is literally just to dump, it's dumping oxygen overboard, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not like, if that connection between the two stages isn't like perfect, the worst thing that happens is some oxygen vents higher than it was supposed. Like, it's not the same thing as like a fueling connection or something like that.
Yeah.
Where you need like some super sophisticated valve. The point of the vent is just to dump excess liquid oxygen overboard. So, but it's a good observation there, Chris. And I wonder, like, why doesn't the vent just stop at the bottom of the ship? Why does it need to continue down the booster a little bit?
Right.
We see similar venting.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. That's the other part that's sort of fascinating me there, because you're not worried about like a physical separation mechanism, and you're not worried about ice downstream of your vehicle. That is a good question. Why does it cross the separation plane? Is a very good question.
Unless does it need to get below the grid fins?
I mean, maybe just to prevent maybe that's it. Prevent accidental ice buildup on your grid fins.
That is not a problem with Falcon. I was actually
that's
going
true,
to
but
talk about
Falcons
Falcon
doesn't
9,
do that.
because Falcon 9, they have it internal. They don't have the pipes outside. But here it's probably because like the methane inside of the engine section might not be a good thing to actually have pipes with liquid oxygen that close together. My thinking, a little bit of a wild think there, but yeah, wild guess right now, right here. Yeah, so in Falcon 9, the engine chill pipes for the MVAC engine run from. It appears that they are brake wires, like you just basically they are pulled as the stage separation occurs. They are pulled from the intrastage, and you can see some of those like dangling. Sometimes when you see the camera feed from the booster from inside the intrastage. Yeah, so those things are similar to what they do here, and in that case, the engine chill pipes just basically go from the engine to outside of the interstage. And sometimes we actually see some of the ice floating off the booster. It's actually related with those pipes, because sometimes you can see like the ice floating off from the booster. It has like a peculiar circular shape that is from the outside of where that engine chill pipe comes from. And sometimes during flight you can also see the engine chill coming off from the side of the booster as well. So there's a lot of things that you can notice on a Falcon 9 flight, and we have a video about that
Oh,
from
jeez.
NAS as well.
Always be plugging, Alex. Well done.
Yes.
There you go. The only other grid fin difference I'm thinking of is because on Falcon 9 they're still folded in while the stages are connected, and they don't unfold until well after the stages are separated. So like maybe that's the only thing I can really think of, to be honest. But either way, I mean it's a pretty minor difference. But regardless, that engine chill vent is still going, and let's take this opportunity for a quick status check. We don't see venting from like the tower GSC side, but we also don't see a frost ring from the vehicle yet. Or from the ship specifically, I should say. But based on the engine chill vent going on the ship, or from the ship, I should say, I would guess that they're getting into loading the ship, and maybe they'll do that before they continue with the booster, or maybe that's the maximum propellant load level they want for the booster on this test specifically. Again, we don't know if it's a full wet dress or just a partial fill test or something like that. But on that front, I'll keep questions coming and things like that. And our next question comes from Toby, who asks, besides a static fire, what still needs to be done prior to launch? Well, I got to pull up that Chris B tweet that Elon responded to, because see if there's anything else. Like, as far as technical milestones go, let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I know the basic timeline for this is they want to get through a series of wet dress rehearsals and everything like that. They are going to destack the ship for its final thermal protection system work and readying there. They still need to remove the top crane attach points and put the thermal protection system over those. And then while the ship is destacked, that's when they are going to do the 33 engine static fire for the booster. And then the goal, as it is currently understood, is that ideally 33 engine static fire and then proceed to the launch attempt. If they end up needing to do more, that would then be in play. And then the ship would come back over and once its thermal protection system closeout work is complete, and it would be stacked. And that would be the stack for what is intended to be liftoff and flight.
Yeah, so, and I'll quote the tweet that basically Chris B responded to Elon Musk on Twitter asking if the sequence was something about what cryo test into wet dress rehearsal, a destack for the static fire, like you said, final preps on the ship 24 while it's destacked. Once you do the 33 engine static fire, you restack, and then you go into your launch campaign. And Elon basically said, that's a good guess. So something along those lines. So wet dress, static fire, and then into the launch attempt. And that's, of course, technical milestones. You're also going to have some regulatory things. The launch license needs to be finalized, although I think we'd likely expect that to include, like, the 33 engine static fire being complete, so the license might not come out until, we keep saying before, there's not a dashboard for this like there was for the environmental assessment. The launch license could show up, like, a couple hours before T0, in theory, so it's not something to hold your breath on, basically. When SpaceX says, in theory, usually it's like a couple of days before, but for the first flight of a vehicle, but basically, if SpaceX says they're going for a launch attempt, that'll be the best indicator.
Does that frost line look like it is decreasing?
You know, maybe a little bit.
It definitely looks like it.
Yeah, that is not a straight line at the top anymore. Yeah.
So that's something to keep an eye on. Could be the end of a test. It could be a recycling back to a previous point before they get back into testing. But there is one frost line that is at least receding, so let's keep an eye on that.
And one thing important to point out, though, they might actually try multiple of these tanking tests in the same day. We saw on the previous full stack testing, they did a couple of days where they did only one species, basically either oxygen or methane. But then there was one day where they tried oxygen first, and then they did methane on the same closure. So it could also be that today they load to these. Right now, to this level, they detank and then they go again later in the closure and load again the booster and the ship, and maybe to a larger extent, or maybe the same, just to gather more data. That could also be a thing.
Yeah, alright. So let's keep an eye out for what they do proceed with.
But definitely the show is not over until the road is open for good. that is
Show's not over till the road is open. I like it. All right, next question here, or not a question, but just a quick thank you to Brandon Meyer, who became a Capcom member. We much appreciate that. And then Alan here with a question that we kind of just answered, but we'll touch on it, asking, will they leave the ship on top for the 33-engine static fire? According to the latest Twitter reply from Elon, it suggests that they'll destack the ship for the static fire. I think that just prevents them from having unnecessary engine, or not engine, heat shield tile work on the ship, because again, when you do that hold down static fire, that's more vibrations than the vehicle will actually see during launch. And so they'll keep the ship off to keep the TPS, the thermal protection system, in the best shape possible, because during a launch attempt, you'll only be held down to that launch mount for a second or two before releasing, and that keeps the heat shield more intact.
There's a black spot there next to that vent to the right, and I'm kind of thinking that's a drone.
Oh, yeah, the black spot in the middle of the air, that's probably the drone.
Yes.
Yeah.
The mosquitoes in Texas don't hover that well, so it can't be that. We also got Daniel B gifting a Red Team membership, so Daniel, thank you for that. Quick super chat here from Paul, no words, just a bit of support, so we appreciate that. And Scott Jones, thanks for becoming a Pad Rep member. Greatly appreciate all of that support. We find another question that we've got here. Here we go. Herman Circus says, what's the venting from under the booster? Is that some number of Raptors being chilled or just LOX tank venting? So what's that venting we see underneath the booster there, Alex?
Yeah, so that appears to be maybe related with the engines. It's a little bit weird because they have also changed the sort of way that the engine chill on the booster works. That is sort of the part of all the upgrades that they have been doing for the past 2 months as well, here on the OLM and also on the booster, that the engine chill is sort of different here as well. But it is also true that I remember, at least on the past, I think it was on past full stack, where I saw that same thing, and the past full stack, those changes were not there. So I'm kind of thinking that it's probably related with actually the bottom of the tank being cold, and we've actually seen that previously for the ship as well, where once they start loading propellants on board, once the bottom of the liquid oxygen tank is cold, you can see some vapors coming off. The only thing that I will point out though is that although that theory might be true, it's also true that condensation coming off from the booster is only coming from the center. So it's a little bit of a back and forth here right now. I'm not fully sure if it's engine chill, if it's just condensation. But you know what? Just keep watching and we'll see.
And maybe
that's sort
we'll
of my,
find out.
We'll find out. That's sort of my whole deal. That, you know, when I don't fully know a thing, I just wait and try to look for more stuff and gather more data, and try to find out.
Alright, let me see here. John H. with the super chat just saying, thanks y'all for constantly improving and innovating. Spreadsheets are the best. I'm sure Adrian's got a spreadsheet open somewhere. We greatly appreciate the support there. Yeah, that's the other thing I should mention though. As we see more of these tests and things, we will get more indicators for what the potential countdown sequence is for the full stack. Obviously, right now, I think it's safe to say we're not seeing a fully nominal test, considering that we haven't even seen a frost ring develop on the ship. And so this is either was held unintentionally because something came up, or they weren't testing the countdown procedure. But either way, we're learning a lot every time we see them do a propellant load test here. We got Jason, who became a Red Team member. So Jason, thank you so much for that. And Ben Scott became a Flight Engineer member. That's a very generous level of support there as well. So Ben, thank you so much. Another question here from Robert saying, any idea how thick the ice on the tank is? I feel like we've estimated this before, but I don't know if we know for sure. Any good estimates on that?
A couple of centimeters. It's not thick. Yeah.
I remember sometimes doing like a volume calculation for like how much mass is it actually adding to the vehicle, but without a good, thickness estimate, it's hard to do. But like a couple centimeters, if that.
If that, yeah, it's very thin. And in all honesty, when the engine's light, most of it's going to shatter instantly, like it does on the Atlas when the Atlas's engines ignite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the Falcon 9.
Yeah, yes. Although I very purposely didn't say the Falcon 9, which is odd for a space mission because the Falcon 9 is white and the ice is white,
yeah.
and the Falcon 9 is always vapory on the outside of it, and you can usually never clearly see the ice shattering off the side of Falcon 9, but it does happen. You are exactly right. Yes.
It also happens that sometimes with all the suit that it has, sometimes just ice doesn't stick to the wall of the booster because
And that is true too. The soot on the reused ones affects the ability of ice to actually adhere to the surface. It's not that it's not forming; it just can't adhere and build upon itself. Yeah, which is partly why you then see it being so frosty on the outside of it. Not frosty, vapory on the outside of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a very important question here from Matt in chat who asks, how much star could a starship ship if a starship could ship stars?
It could ship no stars if a starship could, because a star is way more starrier. I don't know. It's something.
yeah. The second part doesn't really work.
I lost it halfway through, but you get the gist.
I appreciate the message there, Matt. Let me see what other questions we've got.
Hopefully,
here.
a lot of people laughed at me losing that halfway through. Yeah, valiant try.
Let's see. Let's see. Oh, here's a good question. We saw the chopstick arms over at Kennedy Space Center roll out just last night. They're getting ready to assemble that on the ship potentially soon. We have a relevant question here. Why did SpaceX shorten the chopstick arms for 39A versus the ones we see here at Starbase?
Oh, I love this answer. To my knowledge, it's simply because they overbuilt the ones at Starbase, and they don't need to be that long, so they're not.
Yeah.
That's kind of the answer, as simple as it is.
Yeah, there's this common misconception that, because the 39A chopsticks are shorter, right? They are obviously not for the same things as the Starbase ones. But if you actually, you can actually watch some of our videos covering those, where we actually talk about those chopsticks, and you can see they have some of the hardware at least used for catching, like the pistons and things like that, for the rails on the chopsticks. And so it definitely seems like those chopsticks are as well suited for catching as they are for stacking. So it just seems like whatever the reason might be, it might be as simple as, best part is small part. So they made them as short as they could. Because why have it them longer than you need it, right? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that that kind of goes hand in hand with refining your simulations and your models of your trajectory and things like that. Definitely start with a more conservative estimate as to how big you need the arms and things like that. But KSC is a more refined version of the system for sure.
I've also seen some questions about, well, but if they are shorter, it's gonna be very tight at the landing, and it's like, it's already tight with the ones that we have at Starbase. It's already very tight to be landing there, so I don't think just cutting the tip of the chopstick is gonna really worsen things. I think it's already crazy.
It's already crazy.
Starbase, yeah.
It's funny. So let's start with a quick a status update as well. Definitely seeing some frost receding, I think, on both tanks on the booster, slowly but surely. Those frost rings are not as defined as they were before, which does suggest that they may be detanking the booster currently. The engine chill vent is a new thing. We haven't seen that before today, right, Alex?
Yeah, and also one of the things to point out, though, is that while the ship doesn't have any frost on the tanks, that always doesn't mean that there's nothing cold inside.
Right.
As we've mentioned previous times, it might be just the bulkhead. So basically the bottom of the tank might be the only thing being loaded, and in order for you to see that frost, it should be above that dome where it basically meets with the tank walls, in order for that cryo thing to touch the wall and get cold and frosty and all that. But yeah.
Yeah, and of course the engine chill vent is evidence that some propellant has obviously been loaded onto the ship, because otherwise
Exactly.
how are the engine's getting propellant?
Yep.
But yeah, if they just load the bottom of the dome of the tank, none of the propellant touches the outside of the rocket, so you don't see a frost ring. So a
Same
very little
way.
bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, same way that sometimes we've seen static fires on the booster, but we didn't see any frost in the methane
Right,
tank.
yep.
But it's obvious that there's methane. Obviously, you couldn't fire the engines without methane on the
Right.
booster, right? So, but there's methane on the tanks. Just there's no. So same philosophy here, as well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, methane tank's on the top of the booster, right? I always get this backwards.
Methane is top and liquid oxygen is bottom on both
Right,
booster
okay.
and ship.
Right. And so the other bad effect of that is like why you will more often see a liquid oxygen frost ring than a methane frost ring if they're doing a brief static fire, is because you also have all the propellant in the transfer tube from the methane tank all the way down to the booster. So you can load a similar amount of both propellants, but you'll see much less frost on the methane tank because you're also filling up the transfer tube and stuff like that.
And you have to be really careful about the amount of propellant that is in your transfer tubes and not in your tanks, because that can have an effect if you have a hold really, really, really late in the count. The temperature differentials and how some of that temperature in the feed lines becomes different than the temperature that's in your tanks. Now, Starship's going to be able to combat this a little bit because the temperature of liquid methane and liquid oxygen is very, very similar, and the feed lines are inside the vehicle, but it's still not 100% there. So you have to be careful, and you have to consider how the temperature in your feed line is changing, because it's the stuff in the feed line that hits your engines first. And that has to be at the absolute correct temperature range to facilitate the proper start of your engine sequence.
Right. There you go.
This is sometimes known in other rockets as LOX drain back hold time.
Also, when
Is that
they're
a shuttle
doing
term?
static fires,
Sounds like a shuttle term.
Shuttle,
It does
SLS,
sound
Yeah,
like
okay.
any vehicle that uses liquid oxygen and utilizes a feed line to get it to the engines is going to have that consideration to it. Yeah.
See, the other thing to point out though, and we've seen that more pronounced on ship static fires, that sometimes they just can fill a lot of the liquid oxygen tank, and not like nothing, almost nothing on the methane tank, like maybe just a bit, enough for the static fire test. Mostly because if you have a lot of liquid oxygen but very little methane, and a problem happens, read by that as a rod or something like that, you mostly have a lot of liquid oxygen but not a lot of fuel, right? And so the fuel burns off very quickly, and so you don't have really any sort of problem in that sense. But if you load a lot of methane, so if you do the opposite, you load very little oxygen but you load a lot of methane, then the methane can also burn off with the oxygen in the air. So you have a bigger problem in that case. Sometimes to just weight down the booster or the ship for these static fires, they just load a lot of liquid oxygen and very little of methane. That is also a thing on this test as well. Today is not a static fire test, by the way, just because we're talking about that. It's just to not confuse people watching us. But yeah.
Right. Only propellant loading today. No
Exactly.
notices or hazards put out for a static fire. So no engine testing today.
No planned engine testing today.
Okay, I got important caveat, I suppose. Tom Jansen upgraded their membership to the Capcom level. So Tom, thank you so much for that support. We greatly appreciate it. Jim Cabot, a name we see often in chat, says thanks y'all for the continued coverage, and we appreciate that as well. So thank you, Jim. Also, Emin Corin with no words, just some super chat support. So much appreciated. Also got a question here. We were talking about transfer lines. Is there any propellant transfer from the booster to the ship? Once upon a time, there was plans for that, but I believe those have been scrapped, and the fueling connections are completely separate between the two vehicles, right?
No,
Yes.
there's
Right.
no propellant
we did.
transfer from booster to
Well,
ship.
yeah. You both answered the question, but you answered two different questions. Chris said yes, I was correct,
Hey.
and Alex said no, there's no transfer line, which was yes, you're correct. You both said
Exactly.
the same thing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Whew, okay.
Yeah. So
back
to the question and yes to you, Thomas.
But back in, go back far enough, originally for the on-orbit refilling concept for Starship, the plan was to have the propellant transfer lines kind of come out the aft of the ship, And so two ships would kind of dock engine section to engine section in order to transfer propellants. And they said, well, we can use that same connection to actually connect the booster to the ship, and thus you don't need like a Q-D arm on the tower. You can just fuel the entire vehicle through the base of the rocket. But that eventually got de-scoped. They said, well, it's actually easier if you don't have that kind of mechanism. You can just have a Q-D connection on the side of the ship. That means you don't need to pump propellant or move propellant all the way up the booster just to fill the ship. And then the Q-D connection can also just become a side-on docking mechanism for on-orbit refueling. So they tweaked that later. But once upon a time, there was going to be no such connection exists, though. Let's see. Evan asking if that engine chill vent we were talking about earlier could just be a temporary vent to keep it away from the tiles and maybe not the long-term solution. I suppose that's possible. We'll obviously keep an eye on future prototypes as they get built and see if that gets changed. But you will need some sort of engine chill kind of overboard dump, regardless. So they could change how it looks earlier, but it's definitely so it's not necessarily going to look like it does now all the time. But you will need some sort of vent always. And obviously you're not going to vent it like into the engine section and the interstage section there, because then it'll just build up and you need to get it overboard of the vehicle entirely. Skip wants to know why there are no booster ice snow cones in the NSF store, and because they'd melt is not an excuse. We'll have to look into the logistics, but we'll get back to you on that one, Skip. Thanks for the feedback.
I like that though, yeah.
Yeah, what flavor would Lox flavor? That doesn't sound like. It's just pure cold. Is all it is. All right, let's see. What do we got here? Any other questions? Answered a couple of these questions already. Greg asking if we could see a static fire as early as next week. So let's preface this, and then I'll ask for your opinions here. We talked earlier about how we're expecting the ship to be destacked first, and that will only happen after wet dress rehearsals are complete. So let's say if today's testing goes well, this was definitely not a full wet dress rehearsal, so unless they cycle back into more testing later today, which they could certainly do, wet dress rehearsal probably won't be complete until next week, and then they gotta destack and do those things. So I don't know, any odds of getting to static fire next week, or are we expecting a little bit more time first? Chris, you go first.
I don't foresee a path to static fire next week. No.
Okay, a little bit longer time. Alex, what do you think?
I'm thinking more first week of February. That's my thinking for a static fire test. As early as that week, at least. Maybe later than that.
Yeah, Alex and I are in complete agreement on that timeline. Yeah.
My thinking is that, well, just before this test, I actually tweeted yesterday that I didn't see this week any sort of fuel load, like complete fuel load on both vehicles, because after the testing that we saw, the previous full stack testing, it doesn't seem to me that going from that little bit of testing that they did, just fueling one, like filling one tank, filling the other tank, and things like that, like it seemed to me like it made more sense to just do an intermediate step where they fill both tanks, but it's like middle level or like partial levels, and then later down the line, maybe next week, they'll try full levels. So that's sort of my thinking, that next week we're gonna see that kind of testing, and then the following week we might see that destacking and preparations for that 33 engine static fire test. But I'm thinking basically end of January, beginning of February there. It happens to be the same week, so I'm saying it that way because I said first week of February, and it's also the last week of January. So there you go.
There you go. Gotcha. Another quick status update. We are watching as the frost kind of recedes on the booster, so it appears that the booster is detanking currently. We haven't seen any condensation buildup on the ship, I don't think, still, so it doesn't look like they loaded a whole lot of prop into the ship, but they didn't load zero because the new engine chill vent has been active this entire time, so a little bit of prop did get loaded onto the ship, but not enough for a frost ring to develop or anything. And the frost receding on the booster, now this could mean a couple different things. Could mean that they're done for the day and they meet their test objectives for today's test, and they'll... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just because they were moving the camera there before, there does seem to be the kind of frost on the ship that we usually see when they depress the vehicles.
Hmm.
Yeah, we can see a little bit there
Oh, I
of
see what you're
like,
saying. Yeah.
yeah, just a tiny bit of
Like
ice
it's not
there.
a
It's
ring
not
that comes from propellant being in there, but when you
exactly.
drop the pressure in the tank, the temperature drops.
Yeah, once the tank is a little bit cold, it's obviously not frost like thick frost like we're seeing right there at the bottom of the booster, but it's like little bit of ice there that forms in the tanks, and it's totally normal. It doesn't mean that the level of propellants on the tank are all the way there. It just means that the walls of the tank are cold. But the key difference is that once the actual liquid, it's so cold, like people don't really get how cold it is, but it's like as soon as the thing just touches the walls, the frost that forms is very, very thick and very, very noticeable. It's not like this thin ice that it's forming right now on the ship. It's way, way more thicker. Um, so yeah, it's just basically the tank getting cold rather than the liquids being at that altitude, at that height, more better
Right.
said.
Gotcha.
The order merged.
Yeah, I was gonna say, thanks for whoever ordered the Texas Tank Watchers T-shirt. Fun fact: if you order something on the shop, it shows up on screen now, and that means if it's during NSF Live, sometimes you can cover Alex's face. We learned that on the most recent update. And the Starship orbital design there on the hoodie, also a good choice. Appreciate the support, everyone.
Yeah, the destination hoodies for Starship are really cool. I like the Moon, Mars, and beyond feel.
Let me see what other questions we've got going on here. All right, Paul Dawson has a question. Do we think that they are keeping Booster 7 and Ship 24 going just for ROLM testing, orbital launch mount testing, as expendable vehicles to perform the 33 engine static fire? So basically saying they've become ground test vehicles and they'll move on to a new set for flight. That doesn't seem to be the latest we've heard from Elon, at least, right?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, as far as I know, these vehicles are still slated to be the flight vehicles.
Yeah. There's nothing that says they aren't right now.
Right. Of course,
There's
as
that's
testing
they are,
progresses,
like-
they can find things and go, well, okay, maybe they'll change their mind. But it seems like, as
Yeah.
of currently, there's nothing preventing these two vehicles from making the first flight. I guess is the way to phrase that.
Yeah, I had to really reread the question because I started thinking about the next booster, the next ship duo that are sort of here of the similar design, but we know they've also got boosters and ships that are, that are making the current designs obsolete. I think it might be a larger question as to whether like 8 and 25 fly together, or whatnot, in terms of the next boosters in the schedule. But 24 and 7 are the ones that are going to do it as of right now. Yeah.
There we go. And quick question here from Andrew saying, what's the purpose of the D-stack prior to static fire? I think that's mostly, at least our speculation is that mostly has to do with protecting the heat shield tiles, right? Like, just don't subject the ship to vibrations that aren't needed. Let the ship be in as good condition as possible for liftoff.
I think that's part of it, although the other part of me goes, man, don't you want to see what igniting 33 engines does to your heat shield before
Fair.
committing to lift off? But no, I mean, I don't honestly. I mean, I know there's TPS work and thermal protection system work that they need to do on the ship, but yeah, I mean, it is a protection element for the ship, but it's honestly, from my view, it's kind of baffling why they wouldn't want to do a full static fire.
I mean, it could also be. I mean, we see obviously on Falcons, they don't stack with the payload on board. Maybe it's a risk mitigation thing. I mean, they've done several static fires, all with just the booster, and so it's interesting. But according to the latest word from Elon Musk on Twitter, the plan is a D-stack for the static fire, regardless of whatever the reasons may be.
I will argue that it might also come down to just because they're testing the booster. Just test the booster and keep the booster. Like, I don't know, just wildly guessing here that another interesting point here will be that if you put the ship, then you also have to monitor the ship and things like that. Like, it just might be that they just want to concentrate on the booster alone and also use that downtime literally because it's gonna come down.
Jeez.
That downtime to work on the ship itself. Like, as they prepare the booster for that static fire test, they can also prepare the ship for when it goes up again on top of the booster. It's already ready for that flight. And it's amazing because here we see on the left side the engine chill pipes. So the engine chill, it seems like it has stopped,
Mhm.
but the whole thing there, like
Yeah.
the whole engine chill thing on the side of the booster, the frost there remains. So
That's funny.
it's funny, yeah.
Engine chill vent leaving frost on the booster. Definitely the methane tank on top of the boosters, the frost ring seems to be pretty much gone, but plenty left on the liquid oxygen tank. So we're keeping an eye on potential detanking and recycling for another round of tests here in Starbase. Also want to give a huge thank you to everyone who sends support on these streams, whether that's just tuning in, whether it's sending a chat message, sending super chat, membership, stuff like that. If you're looking for another way to be able to support the NSF team, one of the best ways to do that and get something back for it is heading over to the NASASpaceflight.com shop. And we mentioned earlier about the new Destination Known hoodie design with your favorite vehicle Starship on there and a little bit of an homage to the Moon and Mars, potentially to future destinations for the Starship vehicle. Who knows where else the vehicle may end up going. But that is one of the newer designs there on the NASA Spaceflight shop. And of course, everyone who send some support by getting merch from the NSF store that goes directly towards improving our coverage. That's shop.nasaspaceflight.com if you want to get your own. There's also plenty of other merch that you can get, whether it's be metal prints of your favorite NSF photographer photos and things like that. So also there's a new Rocket Garden render that's in there. Ooh, Above the Clouds, I think that's the newest render, or not newest render, that's the newest photo from Nick and Sweeney down at Starbase for NSF, but new metal prints being added all the time as well. So if you need some wall art, another recommendation there. But thank you to everyone who does send support to the NSF team via the merch store. That goes a long way, and we hope you enjoy your merch and things. Also want to bring back in some questions here, and we got a question from Tim saying, if the concrete below the launch mount is damaged during that static fire test, would they repair it before the launch attempt? Surely there's some level of repairs that would need to be done in order for the launch pad to sustain the launch attempt, right, Alex?
Yeah, and that probably is counted into the whole soon calculation from Elon, and so that might go into the whole timeline as well. We know that the 33-inch static fire test is like within maybe a couple of weeks from now, right? But he said late February, maybe March. That's like a whole month of seemingly just waiting, right? There might be more testing later that might not be like a big major milestone. Might be little testing here and there that they might do. They might just basically close out all of that mess that we see there on the OLM. You can see all of that is basically open to the environment, and so you don't want that, all of those pipes and wires and things like that to be open for the launch. Now they might want to, maybe if they are in a rush, but the expectation is that all of that will eventually be covered as well prior to the launch. And so all of those things might go into that sort of month in between the last major test and that timeline that Elon gave of like late February for a launch. I'm more thinking maybe around April we'll see that launch. If that's sort of the whole deal, that whatever Elon says, you gotta multiply that by 2 to get the real timeline. But yeah, the at least my thinking is around the springtime here. Just merely because apart from the testing, it's also like whatever comes next. Like what happens when they do the 33-inch static fire? Like maybe they have a Raptor, just not working properly, to say it a little bit better, right? and they need to change things or something like. There's many things that we'll learn from this testing, and while we know these are major testing that they consider the final testing, it shouldn't be out of the question that they might repeat at the end of the day some of this testing later down the line just to keep refining things if they need if they see the need for that.
Mhm.
That's sort of the thinking here, that we shouldn't be just giving it for like like there could be more testing. That's the whole idea here that I'm trying to convey.
Gotcha. All right. Let's see what other questions and things we've got here. So here's a question from Harvey. If we're looking at the... Oh, hold on. Before I get into the question, I should point out that tower vent, which is spooled up again. That usually means lines are being purged. That could be indicative of more as the teams continue to wrap up a set of testing. Could also be ahead of propellant loading resuming. Could mean a couple different things, but just acknowledging that. And we'll see if we get any other signs as to where the tests are headed today. But back to the question, on that Q-D arm that we see extended from the tower, it doesn't look like it's fully connected, RV says. Basically, there's the single umbilical that is connected. Do we know what's up with the Q-D arm and why it looks a little bit different than it has a little bit ago, Alex?
I see it normal. I'm not fully sure what the problem is. It might be just the perspective, though. Sometimes, like from there, it just seems like maybe there's one tube, but you see all of those cables around it, like the white tube there. It has like a few other dark things around it and things like that. Those are more lines. Some of them are for gas. Some of them are for other stuff as well. There's obviously two big pipes. One is for liquid methane, and one is for liquid oxygen. But then there's auxiliary pipes for helium, nitrogen, and things like that, and gases as well, like gaseous oxygen, gaseous methane, that they need to either put on the engines or drain back or things like that. Like there's a lot of things going on there as well, and so it's just basically a single piece there. All of them basically come to the same thing, that Q-D interface,
like a
and
plate,
that Q-D
right?
is
Yeah.
connected. Yep. And you can see maybe very very faintly, you can see like some cables hanging down a little bit from below. We think that those are maybe data cables that they connect to the raceway of the ship. Those shouldn't be present on the launch day, though. So I'm not fully sure how that's gonna go on launch day, but those are not there when they do things like retracting the Q-D arm and things like that, because they are like hard linked to the ship. They are not made
Oh, okay, yeah.
to be retracted, to be pulled back, basically. So if you're like, for anyone watching, if you're thinking, oh, they're gonna be doing a retraction of the Q-D arm and things like that, they could do all the Q-D itself, but without the arm retracting.
Right.
Because
And to wrap up Harvey's question here, I think the one thing that may be missing and why it looks like, there's a gap between like the truss structure of the arm in the vehicle might just be because of the stabilization like claw that used to be there. Maybe that's what they're thinking of, which they just removed from the design from being unnecessary. So maybe that could be it, but otherwise the Q-D looks about the same as it will and as it should, just without those couple extra wires that we would expect to be removed.
that is actually funny, because the claw was connected to hydraulics on the arm, along with the oh geez, what are they called, the workstations. There are like work platforms that they can be deployed. The thing is, when they remove the claw, they also remove the hydraulic system on the arm, and so those platforms now have to be deployed manually. So if you see them deployed, they cannot be like retracted without human intervention, which is
Right.
it's a little bit weird, but I guess it also makes sense, because you won't see them deployed when there's no one in the tower. I guess you don't need them. They are work on platforms.
There you go. What other questions and things we got here? We got a couple memberships that have come in here. Steve Ano became a Red Team member. So Steve, thank you so much for that support. Connor became a PadRad member, excuse me. Thank you so much. And WPCGI, also a PadRad member. So thank you all for joining the membership program, and we appreciate the support. I also saw one merch order come on screen there, so thank you to that support as well. Here's a question from Brenton asking, why did SpaceX leave the tower and chopsticks bare instead of installing paneling? Chris G, we saw something similar at 39A when SpaceX took over that pad. They added paneling later, but not initially, and that's not a huge deal, right?
Yeah, exactly. There are going to be portions of the paneling on the Starship tower that are going to be somewhat necessary for protecting some of the systems down at the base of the tower from the engine ignition sequence. You can see some of those claddings already there, but yeah, I would expect the towers to get their cladding over time, just like the 39A tower did.
There we go. Another question we got here from Daniel saying, could Ship 24 destacking have anything to do with installing the flight termination system or other pyrotechnic devices? So maybe it's not such a matter of it has to do with the 33 engine static fire, but rather there are final preps they need to do with the ship before launch anyway. We know they have to remove those lift points on the nose cone that are used for crane operations, but they're not aerodynamic and they remove heat shield tiles, so they'll remove them before orbital flight. Potentially it's separate from the static fire and they just need to do final preps including FTS. Would that be feasible, Chris?
You could, except there's nothing that would preclude you from doing a 33 engine full stack static fire and then destacking to do your FTS and pyrotechnic work. So I see where you're going with that, but there's nothing that says, there's nothing that makes one preclude the other.
Right, gotcha. That's a good point. Let me see what else. JP asking, any news on the orbital launch mount at the Cape? Do they even have one yet? Yes, it's being built. It's not being built anywhere where you can see it, but it is being built, and people who have gone on base has seen it. So it exists, and we're expecting to see that obviously appear over at 39A itself once it's ready to be done, ready to do so. But and the orbital launch mount for 39A does exist and is being built. Anyway, still seeing some venting from underneath the booster, and the frost continues to recede on the liquid oxygen tank. That's the bottom tank of the booster. It does appear that most of the frost has receded. In fact, all of the frost has receded there from the bottom of the methane tank, right where you're seeing there. Could still be some final methane being detanked from the transfer tube, though. Also hearing some venting here and there. Haven't seen a big depress vent or anything yet, but they are definitely moving out of the testing sequence that they had earlier. The ship engine chill vent has also stopped, so it does look like the ship is completely detanked at this point. So the question is this the end of testing for the day, or are they going to roll back into new testing once they finish this detank sequence? Alex, are there any signs between the ground support equipment or the vehicle itself or anything like that that kind of indicate that they're into a recycle versus a detank to be done for the day?
It's funny because that was actually what I was about to talk about on the back channels, obviously. That they are obviously detanking, but as always, we don't fully know the whole plan laid out for the day by SpaceX. Equal, like as I said before, it could be just like the past full stack testing that we saw. That one of the days they did multiple tests on the same day. They did multiple fuelings on the same day. So it could totally be the same thing today. We don't know. Obviously, as I said before as well, the last word it's always on that road closure. If it opens, we know that there's obviously no more testing for the day. So yeah, it might be that they're detanking right now. Maybe in an hour or so they might be loading again. So right. we might just be, like, oh, they're detanking, so they're done. Well, might not be for the day. Might be a little bit later in the window that they do some more testing, because the whole window runs all the way to 8 p.m. So there's certainly a lot of time to do any more testing.
Absolutely, completely agree. Got a question here from Justin asking, will the booster have a flight termination system? Haven't seen where it might be located yet. Any clues as to the location of those FTS systems on either booster or ship for that matter?
It seems like they are, well, I mean, it's a little bit obvious, but they are on the raceways. Now, the raceways are obviously where they have, I say obviously, but for some people they are, it might not be as obvious. Basically, those are the locations where all the wires run through the side of the booster and the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case at least of the booster, they also, so the other way around, excuse me. On the ship, they also have pipes for pressurization. Now, on the booster, though, the pipes for pressurization are open. They're not covered. They are not. They are also not running along with the pipe, with the wiring and things like that. But yeah, it seems like they are basically on that section near the halfway point of both the ship and the booster. So around the common dome section. But yeah, both are covered by the tower. They are. You see there those pressurization lines? It's right on the other side.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right around that.
Right.
Yeah, around that height of the booster, but on the other side.
Gotcha.
That's the issue with the FTS on here, that it's on the tower side, so it's very hard to see properly. But yeah, and on the ship the same thing. It's also on the tower side.
Gotcha. We keep hearing like intermittent venting. We haven't heard like a big depressurization vent or anything. Haven't actually picked out where those vents are, but we hear it every once in a while. If we see a depress vent, obviously that's kind of the end of the detanking. So we'll keep an eye
Not
out
a
for
betting
that.
man, but if I were to bet, most of that venting is likely from the tank farm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Here's a good question here from Nate. What booster number do we think they will try for a catch attempt? Thanks for the coverage. All right, wild speculation alert. Alex, you get to go first. How far
boy.
off is a first attempt at recovering that booster?
I'm thinking they're gonna be crazy enough to try just like on the second or third booster that they fly. But truly, I wish it would be a little bit later down the line. Like once they test like maybe a handful of boosters, maybe on the 6th or 7th, that might be a good number already to be confident enough on the booster reliability.
So what do you
But
think
yeah.
they'll do on that development train on the previous flights, where if you're not going to make a catch attempt, do you do any testing with that booster to inform the catch attempt that's coming?
I'm seeing some people already in chat. Like, I'm also curious about what chat might think of this. I'm seeing B11, like booster 11. Someone saying booster 9, 15. Yeah,
I'll go with the higher number
Yeah.
booster, like up
Yeah.
around 11 or 15. Not because I don't think there would be a drive within SpaceX to try it sooner. They've got way too much riding on the system being an orbital transportation system for the Artemis program and for other contracts that they want this vehicle to be able to fulfill, that I think cooler heads will risk.
And that sounds like a big thing.
I think Chris is having a few problems there with the voices, but I think it might be my amp. Yeah.
Where is that vent?
Yeah, so as the vent interrupted me there, yeah, I just end up thinking that there's too much at stake for the program overall to go to NASA and say, well, because we tried to do something cool with the booster that we...
Sorry for interrupting you. I really have to point this out. The Q-D is unhooked from the ship.
Oh
It
yeah.
retracted.
Well,
Look at
that's
that.
interesting.
I'm really sorry, Chris, but that is like one of the tier items here that we're kind of expecting. Well, not expecting, but like kind of waiting as sort of the testing for today. Might be one of the things that they might be testing.
So, all right. So, does the QD is able to reconnect itself, right?
Yes, it is capable of reconnecting itself.
I was gonna say, I was making sure we weren't committing to. Well, now they got to send people back to the past.
I mean, if it fails, they
Or
will
well,
have
obviously,
to send
okay,
people
but
back. But yeah, it should be able to reconnect by itself.
also, I was looking. There was a bigger vent, which it like sounded like the duration and intensity of like a depress vent, but I swear I didn't see it, so I have no idea where that was. I don't know, Alex, if you picked up, or Alex or Chris, if either of you picked up where that big long vent was from.
It might be related with that retraction. The last time that they did full stack testing, they also did retraction tests, and they did it with a QD with cryogenic conditions. Like it was still, like you could see once it detached, it spewed like vapors of cryogenics, so you could see that. But yeah, I'm rewatching the retraction test, and it didn't seem like that this time around. So it might be just at room temperature.
Okay, interesting. I want to give a quick thank you. Tom Dawn with a super chat. This is way to go, Robert Hobson, who of course donated a bunch of memberships earlier. So thank you to both Robert and Tom for that support. And Ron became a Red Team member, so appreciate that support as well. I'll see what other questions that we have in chat here while we wait to see where this testing is going to go. More venting. I do agree a bunch of that might just be ground tank venting, though.
We can see there on the right that venting.
Here's all right. So follow-up question to the booster question that Chris was answering: which ship could be the first catch attempt? Is that all right? I'm gonna start off by answering this question. What happens first, ship catch attempt or booster catch attempt?
Boy. I wouldn't even venture to say any of that, because it feels like they might be spending ships for a long time. It doesn't seem to me that while the chopsticks are configured for catching a booster, it doesn't seem like they are configured yet for a ship. And Elon actually talked about this with Team Dodd, one of his interviews with him, that the idea for catching a ship might be different, that there might be something deploying from the ship or something like that to be able to rest on the chopsticks and things like that, because the way that the ship is stacked is via two stops on the chopsticks rather than the other way around, which is what you would probably think of when landing on the chopsticks, which is what the booster has. And I'm seeing that QD right now moving.
Yeah, let's say they might be
the
reconnecting it, right?
Yeah, just slowly getting there.
Yeah, so what you're looking at on your screen right now, near the bottom of the ship above the booster, that QD arm is now moving back in towards the ship. So they did a disconnect, and now they're reconnecting it. And that could just be a planned test.
We've seen them do this, like, without testing with propellants and things like that, like even with people on the arm and all that. Like they've done this testing before. But you know, sometimes it's good to test them while they're doing other kind of testing, like today, where they've loaded propellants on board and they just, you know, winch back that thing and just, you know, jerk it off. Like, yeah, it's a thing that might be good testing.
Chris, I have a question for you. Is this a common feature? Because I don't think I've ever really thought about this. Is that a common feature for like quick disconnect systems on other rockets too, where they have the ability to reattach? Or because I feel like in my head there's at least some systems that once they disconnect, like if they disconnect right before T0, and then there's an abort or something, like you have to go out and reconnect things. I could be mistaken, but I don't know if you have.
Most are not automatic, no.
Most are not, okay. Should, okay, a question from Johan. Shouldn't the Q-D be quicker? Well, it was pretty quick disconnecting. I think the reconnect is, because the purpose of it being a quick disconnect is to get it out of the way of the launch and stuff like that. But when you're reconnecting it after either an abort or during testing, stuff like that, like it doesn't need to be, within a second,
Which in this case, quick disconnect is not the right term for this then, because no part of this is quick. It's not a T0 umbilical, right? It pulls away before the ship, right? I mean, it's not a T0 umbilical from what we've seen in past testing, correct, Alex?
Yeah, it's weird because we saw recently, but and by recently I mean like weeks ago, like very, very recently compared to other testing, that they seem to do some sort of retraction of the arm that it kind of looked like that, like a T0 arm. It's weird because up to that point I was very confident that it was going to be retracted well before T0, and because they just can simply reconnect it, it's no big deal because you just reconnect it again and it's okay. Like if there's a scrub and you have the arm retracted and the Q-D arm and everything, it's okay. You can just pull it back and reconnect it and whatever. But that testing that they did, I think it was like middle of December. It was like it was not even a month ago. It was very recently, right before the holidays. And I think it's also on one of our Starbase videos that it shows the arm like retracting, and as it retracts, you can also see the Q-D arm pulling away. So the Q-D retracts, and the arm also swings away, and it takes like 10 seconds to fully clear the thing. So it appears that as we see this testing, we might have to rethink the expectations, but that is totally normal. Like that is the whole thing here. That we obviously, if we knew everything, it would be very easy to just say, hey, this is this is that, because maybe SpaceX told us or whatever, right? But here we're mainly guesstimating by the things that we see, and in this case, we saw that testing more recently, so it appears at least that now my theory is that it might actually be retracted at T0. Now, it could also be, though, that it might just be a quick retraction prior to T0. Like, it could be like 30 seconds before, and it's a quick retraction because why do it slow, right? It's like, if you can do it quick. But I guess we'll see that just on launch day. We'll have to wait for that.
Yeah, sure.
I'm super excited.
I also do think we have another view here. This is a photo from kind of closer to the tower side to get just another quick look at that quick disconnect interface that we're looking at. Kevin, if we can get the closer in crop of that, just to show what kind of the plate where the arm connects. There you go. You can see it's below that raceway we were talking about too, when we were talking about the flight termination system and stuff like that. But that's where there's a plate on the arm that reaches out and connects or disconnects from that spot, and that's used for propellant loading. It's used for electrical connections, stuff like that. It's just that umbilical for the ship, between the ship and the tower. And that's a photo taken while it was disconnected, and then they have since reconnected it, as you can see on the live view on the right-hand side. But a different angle that gives you a slightly better perspective of that connection we're talking about.
That is from a few minutes ago. Like that is not some sort of stock photo from a few days ago or something like that. That is from minutes ago. So props to Nick to getting that picture out.
Yep. Let me see what other super chat stuff we got here. We got Dan, who upgraded their membership to the flight engineer level. So Dan, thank you so much for that support. Much appreciated. Very generous. And also Tracy, who gifted 5 Red Team memberships. So again, thank you everyone so much who sends support. All of this goes towards improving the coverage and upgrading equipment and things. So much appreciated. So right now we're still standing by to see what maybe the next step in today's testing will be. We got some frost continuing to recede from the LOX tank on the booster. All the other tanks appear to be fully detanked, I think. But we're still waiting to see if they're going to recycle into more testing, and so we're going to stay live for a little bit and keep you updated on the status of testing. But so far they have definitely accomplished at least a partial load test For the full stack, they definitely loaded significantly both tanks on the booster, and they got a little bit of loading into the ship because we saw that new engine shield vent. That's a new milestone in full stack testing that they reached today. A question here, why do the grid fins on the booster not fold like they do on Falcon 9? Alex, have we gotten any rationale behind that design decision?
I guess the rationale for that is what Elon said once, that this part is no part. If you can keep
Right.
the fins out and not have like a folding mechanism of sorts, then just keep it out and deploy it. It's okay. Like they can just simply keep them out. That's sort of the thinking here.
Right, just simple design, keeping the design and the mechanism is the word I was looking for, simple. And they basically determined that the added drag of not having it fold out is a little bit, is basically negligible, or they can account for it. I do wonder, any word on if they would use those grid fins for control authority on the way up, because they work in both directions, in theory. Would they do that, or is it probably easier just to leave them kind of locked in the position they are in now and only use them on the way down? It would simplify your control system. It would simplify your aerodynamic model. I don't know. Chris, any thoughts on that?
I mean, they technically can be, but they're not efficient in that way.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the most I could sort of potentially see is maybe they have a little bit of stuff during the dense atmosphere, but I honestly don't think they will. And I think the only reason you might see them move would be for load relief as you're going through certain regimes and your angle of attack is changing through the atmosphere. Sometimes aero surfaces on rockets that have aero surfaces are maneuvered during the ascent sequence, not to help with the ascent, but to perform load relief onto either the aero surface themselves or the vehicle as a whole.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I should mention, Starship isn't, or Falcon 9 even, SpaceX isn't the first company to use grid fins on a launch vehicle before. The other current example I can think of is Soyuz. The Soyuz crew vehicle actually uses grid fins on its abort system. So
Yes.
it aborts early in the flight, not the MS-10 abort scenario where the spacecraft just aborts by itself without the tower. But if the launch tower is used early in flight for an abort scenario, the fairing that carries the vehicle actually has grid fins for a bit of support and stability there. There's also, if you go back farther in kind of Soviet rocket designs, the N1 had grid fins at the very bottom of the vehicle.
Yes.
I think some early Universal rocket, the UR series of rockets, also had some grid fin use. So it's not unheard of, actually, but they're making a comeback with SpaceX. And definitely also Relativity Space and their Terran R vehicle has plans to incorporate grid fins, so they're being incorporated into other future vehicles as well.
There's a Chinese vehicle that has it too, right?
Oh yeah, I think Quasar 1A maybe.
Yeah.
But on the bottom too, they're an ascent
yeah.
control system, right?
They have used also for a few. I think it was the Long March 2D. I think it is for the booster.
Oh yeah, when they were working on just experimental steer the booster on the way down, not for recovery, but for controlling the drop zone. Yep.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
I don't think they have used that anymore though. But
yeah, not recently. I do want to clarify. We got a question here, Shudder Moment, saying, "Did we guys not say that earlier? That part of the Q-D was a data cable that has to require manual disconnect." So yeah. So if you go back and look, it's a very small cable. You can only barely pick it out. That would not have disconnected just then when they did that disconnect and reconnect test that we saw. There was a small cable that would not have disconnected, and we're expecting that. There we go. On that left-hand photo, it's you can kind of barely pick it out. It's a very thin wire, but you can see it.
It's not part of the Q-D though. It's on the Q-D arm, but it's not part of the Q-D. And I actually pointed out that while they could retract the Q-D itself, the Q-D arm could not be retracted in this configuration because those wires are not basically meant to break apart, retract and release from the vehicle. We've actually seen that when they've done retraction tests of the arm, while the ship was stuck on the booster, those wires were not there, and they are also not there when they destack the ship, for example, as well, because obviously they have to move the ship away, as well as the arm. So, as long as those wires are there, it's pretty much most likely that the arm is not going to move. Now, if it moves, it might mean, well, not serious damage, but like serious stuff. Like they might have touched the wrong button. Excuse me. It's not something that we should expect.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning. In fact, I think SpaceX has even done this. I remember an old Cargo Dragon mission, Cargo Dragon 1, where they believe where it started approaching. Alex, you know what I'm talking about. It started approaching the station, and there was like a cable hanging from the capsule. Do you remember this?
Yeah. I think it was one of the data cables on the trunk.
Right. It was like
that they have. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah,
it was
it's
similar.
attached from the transporter erector or something like that. Yeah.
So it is not unheard of for like a rocket to drag an umbilical that didn't disconnect properly and take it to space. It's obviously not something you want to have happen, but it can happen. And oftentimes, if that does, obviously one cable hanging from your rocket isn't going to like end your mission, and so it can happen and cannot. It can happen without preventing loss of mission or causing loss of mission or anything, but it's not preferred. So obviously they'll work to make sure that doesn't happen as often as possible. Let me see. We also got a Jim Cabot gifting a Red Team membership. So Jim, thank you again for that support. We've got some support from you earlier as well, so much appreciated. And we got a question from LS here saying, why were the claws on the ship Q-D arm removed? As we kind of touched on this earlier, basically became a design that was not needed, and so they removed it, keep the design simple. Obviously, here in Starbase, SpaceX has talked about this being the R&D facility for the Starship program, and so we're definitely going to see them work changes on the ground support equipment or on the vehicle itself here, and so we'll see those design change somewhat frequently. And then when we see operational launch sites such as those in Florida, you'll see the more matured and refined design choices, and it does appear that they don't need that stabilization from the ship Q-D arm. Or they can use the chopstick arms for some purpose of that view, at least until some point in the countdown. Obviously, they'll need to move out of the way before launch, but it's an unnecessary part of the sequence, so they removed it. Speaking of the sequence, we're still keeping an eye on where they are in their propellant loading or detanking procedures. There's some venting from the tower there. As they continue to vent lines and things like that, the frost continues to recede on the booster as they finish detanking there, and we're waiting to see if they're going to spool back into loading for another run of tests, or if they might be done for the day. I got a good question here from Mark asking if the flight termination system typically disabled after a certain point in the flight path. Of course, we've seen this on Falcon 9 flights plenty of times, even on recoverable vehicles. There's a point in the flight where the FTS is still active, and then they'll actually call out that the FTS has been saved, right?
Yeah, and you normally hear this both for stage 2 and stage 1. There basically arrives a point in the entry in the entry and landing sequence of the Falcon 9. We're going to use the Falcon 9 for this, obviously. But there arrives a point in the return sequence for the booster, right, when it's coming in to land either downrange in the ocean or back on land, where it has enough control over itself that even if an engine were to not reignite for one of the burns, they are specifically targeting the ocean. They are specifically not targeting land. So there become moments when you can deactivate your flight termination system because it actually becomes more of a danger as the boosters are descending and coming back into land, that you don't want to blow them up at 300 feet in the atmosphere, because suddenly one little booster impacting the ocean now becomes a flying shrapnel thing that could actually hit someone or damage property or damage sea assets, right, and stuff like that. So there comes a point in the return sequence where they are just deactivated because it's safer to just let the booster crash at that point because it's coming back into the ocean anyway. And then stage 2, they normally safe the FTS on the second stages after they have basically achieved a velocity or a time in flight where even if they failed at this point, you're coming in at such a velocity that you are going to break up and burn up in the atmosphere. And you're not going to, and realistically, so little of it is going to make it to land that you don't need to worry about it anymore.
Now, here's a fascinating question. I was actually just talking offline with some friends about Starship flight coming up and stuff like that. And we talked about this Stage 2 FTS thing. So I'm going to pitch this question to y'all live on air because I can do that. So on Falcon 9, Stage 2 saves when it reaches that velocity where re-entry will just destroy it anyway, so who cares? However, Starship is designed to survive re-entry. So what logic do you put into the Stage 2 FTS system? Because there's no speed that guarantees a destructive re-entry. Like, even if the vehicle comes in on the wrong angle, obviously it has to come in heat shield first to expect to be survived re-entry, but a vehicle that big will also, parts of it might survive even if it does break up. So here's the question. Do you keep the FTS active until you've actually just reached your stable orbit and then you safe it? Or is there some other point where you can expect the Stage 2 flight termination system to save?
Well, here's the thing with Starship. On some of the flights, Stage 2 won't even have a flight termination system.
Right.
Because here's the weird part with Starship, right? For some of its flights, it is essentially just a gigantic Falcon 9, right? It's taking up satellites, it's taking up payloads, it's not carrying life of any kind. You don't put flight termination systems on the crew carrying parts of your vehicle. So like Falcon 9, the first and second stages have flight termination systems, but Dragon does not. For the space shuttle program, the external tank and the solid rocket boosters had flight termination systems on board. They were technically called range safety systems back then, but the orbiter did not. Absolutely did not, because you don't destroy the thing with your crew on it. So Starship's going to be interesting. So when it's carrying people, it definitely won't, just from you don't accidentally want to kill your crew with an accidental firing of your flight termination system. Right. So on payload missions, you would still potentially want to destroy it and have the option to do that, especially if your trajectory is going to take you over Cuba or Florida or the Yucatan or Mexico, and you're not quite at the velocity where the impact points would destroy the vehicle. And your point about a thermal protection system and also the steel that they are using is almost capable of surviving re-entry on its own without a heat shield. So there are still moments where you would want to potentially destroy it in the event of a launch failure, just to help mitigate the damage that you could do to people on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, the math that goes into behind that, it's like there's the probability based on the vehicle configuration and its trajectory and stuff like that. Like, it's the odds of it causing harm to anyone on the ground, and you basically calculate those odds on all these different flight scenarios across the entire trajectory. And when you do the math, you figure out, okay, which decreases the odds more. Lots of small pieces that might burn up on their own, but are also like a shrapnel field, or one big piece that can land at one specific point. And that's how you determine your FTS safe zones and stuff like that. And like you mentioned, it becomes a lot more complicated with a vehicle like Starship.
Yeah.
Even on those crewed missions, though, I think we'll expect the booster to still have an FTS, because if like something happens while the booster's coming back, the ship's doing fine or whatever, but the booster encounters an issue later in flight after separation, you still want an FTS on that system, right?
You would, but I think this is an important moment to sort of step back and talk maybe a little bit about flight termination systems, because I think we tend to think of, rightfully so, because these are the ones that are most commonly used, that, you know, every flight termination system is a press a button and the rocket goes kaboom, right? But some rockets and some safety systems are just thrust termination, where you know the trajectory that the rocket is going to be flying on is not going to pose a threat, so you don't need to blow it up. It's not going to get wildly it's not going to fly wildly out of course in such a way so quickly that you couldn't handle that. So some rockets, their flight termination system is just shut the engines down and just let it fall where it's going to fall. So you might also get to a situation where that is the better element for Booster and Starship. I don't know, right? We'll have to see where you get with that, but just simply cutting the thrust is also in some ranges a valid flight termination system.
And also, I mean, Alex, but you mentioned this in the back channel too. Sometimes a rocket will the FTS command simultaneously, it shuts down the engines too, but you're still destroying the vehicle. Like sometimes it's both.
Sometimes it's both. I think that the old Titan rockets, the old Titan 3s, were like that. The commands to shut down the liquid core engine on the variants where the liquid core was firing at that time. The command was to shut down the liquid engines, and then because the Titans had solids, you had to blow it up at that point, and that's the main difference. Thrust termination only works theoretically with liquid-fueled rockets. Once you start adding solid rocket boosters, so like thrust termination would not work for SLS. You have to blow the solid rocket boosters in the event of a mishap on a vehicle like that. So yeah, different ways of thinking about it.
Got it. Here's an interesting question. While we wait for the fate of testing today, I'm going to hand this off to you because this is a wild speculation question. NXLXN wants us to answer, what is your hottest take about spaceflight in the next 5 years?
Oh boy, take it away, Chris.
I think no matter what your hottest take, no matter what your prediction is, you'll be wrong.
Well, fair.
That's my joke answer. Hottest take on next 5 years. We're in 2023, so let's do that.
I'm trying to think if I have any hot takes. Usually I'm afraid to make hot takes because then I look silly.
I mean, they really, yeah. I mean, honestly, my answer is like every timeline companies are working to right now are just going to stretch.
Sure.
Like, I mean, it's not going to be. I'm not going to have a hot take that says we're going to have a lunar base. We're not. Like, we're not going to be on Mars in 5 years with humans. Like, there's 5 years is maybe a bit too constraining for the question, actually.
I guess.
Because we're in this. I mean, I'd be curious on your thoughts on this, Thomas. Because we're in this like very cool transition period where we're developing the technology that will really allow for a massive change in how we utilize, live, and work in space. I just don't see that fully coming to fruition in 5 years.
Right. I think we'll have steps in that direction.
Yeah, exactly. But like, even
wondering...
if like we're going to have another space station, it's still going to be ISS and CSS as long as neither of them get hit by space debris. You know, like Axiom might be added to the station to the ISS at that point, but it's not going to be free flying in 5 years. Right. You know, orbital reef isn't going to be around in 5 years. So yeah, it's interesting.
Maybe a hot take I might be willing to make here, because current timelines, I mean, SpaceX wants to have people launching on Starship by like next year or something. At least according to like Dear Moon timelines and things like that. I think I would not be surprised. I'm kind of hedging. This isn't really. It's not a sizzling hot take if I'm hedging this much, but I would not be surprised if 5 years from now Starship has still not launched crew on its own.
Yeah, you know, I honestly wouldn't necessarily be surprised at that as well, because there's a lot. I mean, we were just talking about it, right? You've got to prove the catch system.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know they're not doing it on Flight 1, and we've said before, but for those of you who have joined us since, like, I mean, I think they're going to be really hesitant to try this until they've got multiple launch sites up and running, because you don't want to bring the lunar lander part of the Artemis program to a complete standstill because you were trying to do what effectively was a spectacle that didn't need to happen yet. Sure. Not saying they don't need to test it to get to full reusability, they absolutely do, but this is just from a timeline perspective going to come down to a balancing act of what they want to do and when they have the assets to actually try this stuff.
Alex, what's your hottest take for the next 5 years? You're up.
My hot take is like a mix of all of the old thing that they said, that you guys said. My hot take is that a Starship's first launch with crew will be from the moon.
Well, you know what? I would agree with that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And it's not gonna be sooner than 2028. That's my thinking.
2028.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's your
I know.
review for Artemis 3?
Yeah, I know Artemis 3 is currently scheduled for 2025, late 2025. But yeah, I'm thinking 2028 is much more realistic. Now, I will
Oh,
say
that's
though,
funny.
that the previous timeline NASA was working like in 2019 before they moved it to 2024 was a landing in 2028. I'm of the opinion that if they had kept that timeline, we might not see any lunar landing this decade at all.
Sure.
So
that's
I'm
true,
of the
yeah.
thinking that that acceleration, that move forward to 2024 helped a lot to keep things this decade at least.
Right.
That's a good point. Especially that last part about keeping it in the decade. But I also just want to take a moment to commend you, Alex. Like you there's always moments in this industry and working in this industry where like you hear the phrase and you're like, oh my god, that is the first time that's going to happen. And like when you said the first time Starship will launch with people will be from the moon, I was like, wow, first time we've ever been able to say that in history about a rocket.
Right, yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, well, okay, like the Apollo lunar ascent
Lunar
module, did
module.
it technically launch from Earth first? Like, yeah. But I see what you mean, of course. Let's see. But yeah, so I think Alex, I see the 2028 comment. I think I will say it will happen between the current like 2025 target and 2020. I think it'll happen in the middle there. First.
I'm also thinking. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, my thought is kind of 2026. I'm not quite as pessimistic or realistic, depending on how it turns out.
We'll see in 5 years how this goes.
We'll see in 5 years.
Someone mark it down. In 5 years, we'll do on this stream. They said this about Artemis 3. No.
Oh man! All right. Well, there's our hot takes, chat. You asked for it. This is what happens when Starbase takes a while to depress things.
I do think that this is like the fastest way to go there. Like with a Starship, and with that original timeline of 2024, because that put forward a lot of contracts, a lot of appropriations, like funding and things like that. If they had kept 2028, we will not go to the moon back. Like, not this decade. I'm not
sure.
Yeah, but yeah, with that, I'm really sure at least by 2028 we might see people back on the moon.
All right, let's bring in some more questions and stuff here. Here's a question: other than crashing into the ocean, is there another way for the booster to land without being caught? So I guess since talking about crashing, I mean just other fates for the booster. The booster could just fall on like a ballistic trajectory, right? Like without any attempt to slow down or land or whatever.
Is there another way for the booster to land without being caught? I mean, if you put big enough parachutes, you might try something like Rocket Lab.
I mean, yeah, big enough parachutes would do it, but I mean, you could also go the Gemini route and like strap wheels to it and a big parasail. Joking answers aside, unless you are going to outfit it with legs, catching it with the tower is the only option now, unless you're going to outfit it with legs.
Right. And yeah, I mean, mention the ocean splashdown. I would still not be surprised if at some point during Starship R&D they go with we're going to do a soft splashdown with the booster just to practice, the landing burn and stuff like that. But that's obviously not a long-term recovery solution. That's just a test flight thing.
And it would make sense too, like what we were saying, like what they used to do with the Falcon 9s and everything.
Right. Yep. D.A. Swanson, thanks for gifting a Red Team membership. Much appreciated. If you got that membership, make sure to thank them in chat. Appreciate the support, though. Robert has a question for another take of ours on future SpaceX vehicles. Any idea or any predictions, I guess, on future scaling up of Starship once this version is flying?
I can take that to some extent. To some extent, it's easier to stretch the boosters and the ship than it is to make them wider. But you reach a point where the added mass and everything of the propellant begins to hit you if you're not increasing the performance of your engines or increasing the number of engines that you have down below you because your thrust to weight ratio starts to go down the more propellant you put in. But Elon has talked about potentially stretching them a little bit to start with. But the other thing that's been mentioned, it hasn't been mentioned in a few years, but the current diameter of Starship is 9 meters, and there was an idea to go to a 12-meter diameter booster and ship as well. So those would be some of the scaling up options that would be available for Starship. I might end up eating my words on this, but I absolutely don't think we will ever see 3 of these things strapped together in a Starship heavy configuration. Mainly because I just don't know what place on the planet could take that much thrust. I joke we could, but like one booster is 16 million pounds of thrust, so multiplying that by 3, that's a lot. So I really just don't see why that would even ever be needed, especially if orbital refueling comes to fruition like they want it to. That's the game changer that sort of makes making the rocket bigger kind of obsolete to some degree, because Starship is already huge from a volume perspective from the payloads it can carry. But then its ability to refuel in orbit is the clincher for it.
Yeah, like three core Starship will be really crazy from a stage 0 perspective as well. It will be a lot of OLM piping and tank farm and all that. But yeah, I think it's more likely that we see like a stretch of the tanks. That is probably more likely, and we saw that for Falcon 9 as well. That it's easier to just stretch the tanks because you just add more rings, rather than actually change the diameter of the rocket. Like once you change the diameter, you're basically building a different rocket because you need different tooling, you need different handling and things like that. You need a whole lot of things different once you change the diameter. But if you just like stretch the tanks, well, if you stretch the tanks on the booster, that will mean the ship is taller, is higher on the tower. So you probably need to change a few things on the tower. But if you make the tanks on the ship taller, that might also that might not be that big of a deal if you did that.
You just have to do the Kerbal thing where you grab the tower from the bottom, you move it to the side, you add an extra segment, then you put it back. It's easy.
Yes, it's very easy. Plug and play tower segments, yes.
And it's in fact one of the things that we actually expect is that maybe tankers and like depot for like HLS might be a little bit stretched, like with longer tanks and things like that. That might be a thing, and in those cases, the only thing that will need modification to the ship itself will be the lift points for taking the ship with the sticks. But everything else might be just the same.
Yeah,
really
and to your point about the fueling tankers, that's a good point, because one thing about the fueling tankers to bear in mind is it's not just the fuel that's in Starship, right, that it's got that has to be accounted for in the liftoff dynamics. There's also the ability to take 100 metric tons to orbit. So you have 100 metric tons of payload that you can, theoretically put in here for part of the transfer. So what you were saying there about the tanker ships, the internal tanks being bigger than what we see on Starship right now, I think, is exactly your answer to that one of how they're going to end up doing it.
Well, speaking of future Starship planes, we got another question here from DJ Red who says, do we think the third tower in Florida could be a catch-only tower to not risk the orbital launch mount? So we've talked about this idea before. We're building an extra tower down in Florida for catches only to reduce risk to the launch mount, at least in the near term. Do you guys think that's going to be a viable option or an actual plan that they put into place?
When plans for wherever the next tower in Florida were to end up, or potentially wherever the next tower were to end up for them, there could be something to be said for, hey, we're going to build it anyway. We know we need time to build an orbital launch mount anyway, so let's use it for some catch attempts. I could potentially see that being a viable option if they wanted to go down that particular path, because nothing would necessarily preclude them from doing it, and you would get some degree of safety of not destroying a launch site in the process of doing that. But you'd probably also be building a launch site at the same time you're building the other tower, or at least moving that tower out to the site. So I don't know, like it's all sort of just going to come down to where does that tower actually end up going on Cape Side. Know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a whole deal here where that tower is going to go. I'm of the opinion that it's going to be a full-on launch tower with its OLM and everything. And the reason why they're doing this right now is just basically because they can. They have a set of people there that have built already one for 39A, and why not? You can just keep going, and whenever they have permission to build, we're thinking either LC-49. There's also Slick 47 that they have also looked at. Whenever they are allowed to build there, they can just go and put it there and start building really quickly. That's at least what I think here. I do not foresee, while I wish that will be the case, that they built a catch-only tower and they were not messing around with actual launch pads and breaking towers and things like that. I will say that it appears to me that so far it doesn't seem like that because we've seen parts for a third orbital launch mount. Apart from the orbital launch mount that is like hidden someplace else that we cannot take pictures or anything like that, there's more parts that we've seen from satellite pictures outside of Hangar M for a third one. So there's parts for a third tower, there's parts for a third orbital launch mount. Just add up 1 and 1 and you get 2, right?
Right, gotcha. All right, well, there's our take on that then, and obviously we're going to keep an eye on construction down at KC and stuff like that. That's what we're thinking now, but obviously plans can change, and also we'll keep an eye on what we can see. But otherwise, we're going to keep our eyes down here at Starbase, where propellant testing is still underway here, with some frost still visible on that booster. We're standing by to see what the next steps may be. I think we're going to rotate out a voice here. I think we're adding Chris Bergen to the commentary team here for us today. Chris, you with us?
Yep, I thought I'd join in because if I start talking, the usual routine is as soon as I get about 30 seconds into an answer, I hear, break, they're doing something, they're venting and fueling, like everything's getting frosty, they're launching the thing. They're launching it, Chris, stop talking, they're launching. So that's why I've come on, basically try and unjinx it into doing something.
There you go. Well, we'll see if it works. Thanks, Chris, for hopping on. And to the other Chris, Mr. Chris Gebhardt, thank you for starting our commentary off today for a couple hours, and hope you have a good rest of your day. We'll talk to you later.
Indeed, and maybe look out on the text version of our website for some cool little thing about a mission to Titan. Yes.
Interesting.
All right, but yes, it was wonderful joining y'all and talking through some of the fuel and ops with Starship here. I'll pass you back to Thomas and Chris and Alex. Later, nerds.
All right, thank you, Chris G. Appreciate it. As always, keep the questions coming. If you got questions, tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat. We're going to keep those coming. And our next question, we're full on into predicting questions while we wait for more updates on testing here. And so Jonathan wants us to answer which will carry humans first, Starship or Vulcan?
That's a good question.
You want to go first, Alex? 'Cause, yeah.
I'm just gonna say Starship.
I agree. I think
you gotta
Starship...
you gotta justify your answer. You can't just be like.
Oh.
Okay. I just think Vulcan will launch crew, but it will be way late into the 2020s. That's my thinking, and maybe Starship will do it first.
Right,
Chris,
my turn. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say Starship too, and I'll qualify that. Even though I know that Elon has said he wants to, and correctly said he wants to launch Starship. I think he said thousands. I'm sure I can't find a tweet now, but I remember him saying thousands of times before he puts people on it.
Like at least hundreds, but yeah.
I would probably say hundreds makes more sense, and it's got the potential cadence for that. Whereas Vulcan hasn't got the cadence, and I'm sure Tory Bruno's in the same mindset. He's not going to put people on Vulcan until it's really shaken out to the point and it's got the kind of like history behind it, like Falcon 9 had to get before it put people on it. And it's just so important now. If you lose a vehicle, it's bad. If you lose a vehicle with crew on,
Right.
even though now there's obviously a lot of safety involved that the crew should be okay, it's just so bad. It's not even worth even taking a risk to a point where you need to downplay as much risk as possible by buying into experience. And Vulcan's brand new rocket, Starship's brand new rocket, but Starship will launch so many times that I think he'll get that experience level before Vulcan will.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And also, I mean, it's just looking at the near future, at least, as far as crew vehicles go. You have Crew Dragon on Falcon 9. Starliner's future, they seem to be, at least mostly until now, have been confident that they're not going to move that over to Vulcan. So we're not really sure what Starliner's future is. But there's no crew vehicles currently planning to use Vulcan as a crew launch vehicle, at least not publicly stated. So I think Starship's got plenty of human spaceflight plans. It's basically the reason for its existing. So I think I'll side on
they've got to
Starship,
launch
right?
Tim Dodd, haven't they? They've got to launch Tim
Right,
Dodd
yeah.
before long, so yeah. There's some incentive for Starship. We've got to get Tim Dodd into space. Come on.
Yeah, so there you go.
That is also why I was thinking that Vulcan will launch crew but late into the decade, because what else is it gonna launch with crew on board? Like Starliner, if it is a Starliner has at least until 2028 launching on Atlas 5.
Right.
So that's a long time, and maybe Crew Dream Chaser, like that's another opportunity, but when is that coming? Right? Zero Space has been kind of hinting at new versions of Dream Chaser for Crew and things like that.
Mhm.
Apart from that, we really don't have any answers in that sense. Also on timelines as well. So yeah, the best bet right now is that if Vulcan launches any crew, it might be either of those two vehicles, and it might be way later into the decade. So that's why I think Starship might be first in that case.
Yeah, sure.
Not because like, oh, you're a hater of Vulcan or things like that. I have my preferences, but I still love all rockets.
Let me dive into some more super chats and questions and things that have come in here. Joshua saying, we're talking about the tower segments that they've been building in Florida for another tower, saying that they might be building pads and tower sections onshore to be transported and assembled onto a rig, so an offshore platform. That's also definitely a possibility. We haven't seen much in the way of the sea launch platforms or anything recently, but obviously we would expect them to build a lot of stuff on dry land before they assemble on the platform, so that is an idea. Thank you for that question, Joshua. Also, James says, can't wait for your live stream when this Starship goes up. Always a bang-on job you do. Well, thank you, James, for that support there, and we are also definitely looking forward to streaming the first Starship orbital launch. Let me see here. Oh, here's an interesting question, asking why are vehicles remained rectangular shaped, and or why are vehicles not become rectangular shaped like in other sci-fi shows? Why do they've been staying cylindrical? I can actually answer this. The reason that most pressure vessels are cylindrical or spherical or round overall in shape is because if you have sharp edges in a pressure vessel, that increases the stress you experience on those in those corners and on those edges. Where if you have a cylinder, the stress around that cylinder is uniform. In a sphere, the stress on all sides of the sphere is uniform and the same. So when you have pressurized propellant tanks and things like that, it is, and also if you have a spacecraft, we have a cabin that needs to be pressurized with breathable air and stuff like that. It is beneficial to have those vessels have round edges and fillets and things. So that's why rectangular vehicles, while they look cool in sci-fi shows, aren't realistic from an engineering perspective.
What about a Borg cube?
That is the pinnacle of inefficient pressure vessel. That would be a very bad idea. Oh man, let me see what else we got here. Here's a good question, and I want to tie this into a larger discussion. Once the first vehicle here gets an initial orbital test flight, when are we going to start seeing test flights in support of the lunar Starship and the human landing system for Artemis program? Chris B, what do you think we're going to start seeing those milestones?
Oh, well, it's kind of funny because we saw the nose cone mock-up with the NASA worm, best logo by the way, NASA worm and US flag down at the production site, which was soon scrapped. But we were hoping they were going to do some internal work on that. We might get some sneak previews of what they were planning for HLS, but that was just basically, I think, for sure, during the solicitation process where obviously SpaceX won. So it might have helped, but it's something where the milestones, I know a few people with HLS at NASA, and they're very much embedded with Starship. It's quite surprising how, well, it's not surprising really, actually, it's because it's a NASA contract, it makes sense they're embedded, but they're getting a lot of information right now on HLS in this testing cycle, even though this test launch isn't for HLS, it's for Starship itself. It's a test flight, but I think we might start seeing the propellant transfers. That might be coming up in the pretty early on in the test cycle. So that might be 3 ships along. Alex, I think you might know. Elon has said they're looking to, or even HLS has said it publicly, that they're looking for a refilling test pretty early on in the test flights. And I think that'll probably be one of the biggest milestones for HLS program because that is an integral part of the lunar program with Artemis. So, Alex, can you remember which one it was, which flight it was they're going to test this refilling?
Yeah, so we believe it might be with ship 26. We're still kind of up in the air with that information, but it definitely looks like it's going to be one of the first few flights, but it's not going to be ship to ship. So the initial transfer of propellants that they're going to do, like those tests, are going to be on the same ship, just to be sure, and then it seems like later down the line they're going to be actually docking 2 ships together and doing the whole thing. Because if you think about it, it makes sense to first do it like a little bit of a subscale thing, where maybe you transfer, I say subscale, but still, it might be like a few tons. And that's way more than whatever all the testing has been done with cryogenic propellants before. So, but compared to the eventual transfer of fuel, that's gonna be very, very small. Like the eventual transfer of fuel is gonna be in the order of hundreds of tons. So doing first like a subscale on the same ship, just transferring between tanks, and then moving to 2 ships, either one moves to the other and the other moves to the one, whatever, right? And then eventually moving to an actual depot, fueling it and things like that. That could also be the case here, that they progress in that direction.
All right, really quick, I want to jump in here. I think we're going to have some breaking news. It's not really breaking news, but a break-in here from the Best Coast. Over on Space Coast Live, where more GSE tanks that are almost certainly belonging to SpaceX are being moved to the turn basin right now from the general direction of 39A. We saw a bunch of tanks get staged there earlier, just yesterday, I believe. And now that another tank has appeared, so it looks like more GSC tanks are on the move from KSC, potentially bound for Starbase. We've seen them do a shipment like this before, although I think this shipment now has even more tanks available. It's going to go behind some buildings here and then come back towards the where the press site is and where the turn basin is. But just breaking in because we saw that happening, figured it'd be of interest. These could be in support of future Starbase testing.
We should have put you there. You're there in Florida. Like news programs with a microphone and everything. Breaking news from the Kennedy Space Center.
But anyway, figured that'd be of interest.
Yeah, and it might be related with a Starbase because those tanks might be going to Starbase.
Right, exactly.
Well, instead of a Starbase, more like to Massey, but we'll see. Yeah, those tanks there.
Yeah, those are the other ones they staged
smaller,
yesterday.
These are the ones on the right are smaller pressurization. The other way around. The ones on the left are smaller pressurization tanks. It seems, usually either helium or nitrogen at high pressures, and the other ones on the right, we're not fully sure what they are for, but we'll see once they arrive to. I'm mostly sure they're going to Starbase or the vicinity of Starbase, aka Massey. We see there also one of those pipes. It's it's not a used Falcon 9 booster, by the way.
It does kind of look like it though,
It does
right?
kind of look like, yeah. That pipe might actually be related with the deluge system, but not the deluge system at KSC. It might actually be related with an upcoming upgrade after the first flight for Starbase. I will see. We see more pipes there as well on the background. That might be one of the upgrades that we might see after the first flight. We'll see.
I just wanted to nerd out a little bit by the turn basin because one of the first things I saw at KSC was one of the offloads of an external tank at the turn basin. That has seen so much history. It's right back to the Saturn program. Those vehicles have come down. What's the Banana River? Is it into the turn basin and then offloaded onto the VAB? So much history on that. A little bit of concrete just for shipping in, barging in. And of course, now we'll eventually see Starships being barged in potentially to the turn basin. All that we know is Elon confirmed, because a lot of people were saying they couldn't ship Starships and boosters and ships and what have you. So it was a good answer from Elon that he said they were going to ship to the Cape from Starbase the initial KSC Starships because Robert's Road will take a while to get ready. And I'm hoping they'll be offloaded at the turn base, which makes sense to me because that's obviously the road up to 39A. So hopefully we'll see even more new vehicles arriving in that historic part of KSC.
And not just 39A too, they can access the Roberts Road facilities from there too. So if they need to go back to processing facilities there before they go to the launch pad, they can do that too. There we go. Good. The same shop order now appears twice on screen because we're just showing the Space Coast live feed. But there's that tank coming back. That looks like way bigger than the other ones that they had staged. So that's a massive ground tank there. And so people asking in chat, like, if it's coming from 39A, is that an indicator of a problem? It could be, but it could also simply be like they're moving around resources and they need the tank at Starbase more urgently, so they're just going to move it. Obviously, if it was a tank that was like defective, they probably would just get rid of it entirely, right? So, I think, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like it's more likely it's just a shifted priority, and they need the tanks in Texas first.
Yeah. You're most likely right there. Yeah, we've seen that before. We've seen the moving tanks from here from 39A to Massey. Their sort of cryogenics test site at Texas there. Right down the road from a Starbase. So yeah, that might be a thing.
There we go. What else we got here? Well, we're still waiting for Frost to defrost.
We do have a pearl because we always mention it when someone brings up the best coast. We have to have a pearl. And
geez.
once again, East Coast wins with 45% of the 3 options. Because I put Gulf Coast in there, obviously, because that's people keep asking, what about Gulf Coast? So there we go. We've had a little pearl.
I don't know how many times we have to hold this poll before we all just accept the fact that the East Coast is the best coast. I mean, come
That's
on.
a very good point, Thomas. Yeah.
I'm expecting Jack to barge in and be like, "What are you saying?"
Man. Let me see, what other questions we got here? Keith asking, will the orbital flight test carry a full propellant load? Is there any reason they would underfuel the rocket for the first test flight? I mean, that takes away some contingency scenarios, doesn't it?
I mean, it is true that if you don't fully load the rocket, like if maybe it is like 80%, it might still be able to go into orbit because it has it has plenty of margins. But it is also true that they might actually just load it entirely, just like like a normal launch, just because that proves everything, right? Like you don't need. I don't know, like it makes sense, but I guess both things just make sense either way. Like I could see them unloading, like not fully loading it, but also fully loading it. We'll see once launch day comes.
Personally, I would be surprised if they don't fully load it, just as a full-up test of everything,
Yeah.
Here's a question from ZChess who says, do we think that Starship will take over SLS Cargo's job as delivering supplies to the lunar surface? Alright, well, let's break this into a couple parts. First of all, I'm pretty sure, Chris B, correct me if I'm wrong, SLS cargo is likely kind of de-scoped, and SLS is going to remain the crew launch vehicle for Artemis rather than a cargo vehicle, right?
Yeah, the variants for SLS is Block 1, the one you saw launch with Artemis 1. That's going to launch several more times. Then they're going to move to Block 1B. Block 1B is the same kind of vehicle, but with the EUS, which is the Exploration Upper Stage, with 4 Altel engines, and that's got a capability of going to 105 metric tons. So it's quite a boost up. I personally thought they should have started with a booster. Sorry, Block 1B. Thank you for venting, Starship. And they're going to go over to Block 2. The Block 2 might not happen because that is just quite a lot of work for a little bit of extra upmass, where they probably work with the ball boosters and work with RS-25 modifications to get a bit more upmass to make it more like a Block 1B plus, shall we say. There was also going to be the cargo version of the Block 1B. So that was going to be a nose cone, like you see, but with the power of the Block 1B. That pretty much went onto a back burner, and we've not heard anything since, so we believe that's probably not going to happen. And a lot of that might be to do with Starship, ironically, because Starship really provides that cargo upmass that they need, and obviously at a much cheaper price point, and having to play around with the SLS configurations. So yeah, a long answer to a short, no, I don't think block cargo Starship SLS will exist.
Right, exactly. And Starship or vehicles similar to Starship, if you look at future evolutions of New Glenn or things like that, will be able to fill that role. Let's see here. So getting some new venting here. Alex, what kind of signs are we looking for to get any clues as to the next step of testing today?
Well, we've seen detanking right here on the booster is still progressing, or at least there's some ice still left over. But it is true that they could try again at any point, anytime soon. It just seems right now that everything is very much pulled down, that they're not really doing much. But as I said before, the show is not over until the road is open, and I believe the road is still closed. So once we see, there we go, you can see there the share of lights, and so once we see that road open, that's when we can call it a day. But there's always an option here that they just basically activate everything back again and go ahead with another fuel load test here. And so we'll see. Right now we are in kind of a waiting pattern here, as Peters will say. Yeah, so we'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if they did also like a Q-D retraction there on the booster as well. I don't think they have done that today, but they've done that on previous occasions, on previous testing. So that might also be another thing that they might try again as well. But, you know, just keep watching and see what happens.
All right, let me see what other messages we've got in here. Smart gifted a Red Team membership, so appreciate that support. Starship 24, the ship itself, and chat with the Super Chat support, appreciate that as well. RCM says, thanks for making my rainy day, keep up the great work, appreciate the kind words there, and thanks for the support. Matt became a PadRat member, so appreciate that, and hope you enjoy your membership perks. And James says, looks like a second tower is happening in Starbase. I have not had a chance to watch the flyover video that we just published. Alex, I think maybe you have. Did we see some evidence that maybe more tower stuff is coming? Was that where that's from?
Yeah, so I saw those pictures. I have a wild theory, and maybe not a lot of people agree with this, but I do not think that's the location of a new tower. I'm thinking it is for sort of an extension of the tank farm, actually. And there's some indications that might be the case, very subtle indications. I'm kind of waiting for more things to happen to actually call it, you know, for real, that it is going to be like an extension of the tank farm. Not a whole different tank farm, but more like an extension of it for the current OLM. Whether that'll happen or not, we'll see. But yeah, there's some of the indications is that they're putting in a new wall. It seems like they're doing some they seem to be moving some of the ground around it. It will seem like it
There you
might
go.
be related with. There we go. That's the picture. Well, the video actually. There's some groundwork near it that might seem to imply there's going to be a berm nearby. That's more of an indication of a tank farm, just like the burn that we see there on the tank farm as well. Yeah, yeah. So in some of those angles, you can see that square on the ground. It's very noticeable from the air. Yeah, it's probably easy to think it's Nick there. It's probably very easy to think it's for a new tower, because of the placement, the location, and like it's a square, just like the tower. But if you actually look at the extension of like the maps and the plans for an extension of the site, it doesn't line up with the location of the second tower that they were planning for here at a Starbase. So it's definitely for something else, and that something else, my theory is that it's going to be an extension of the tank farm. Hi, Booster 9. And there we go.
Yeah. Gotcha. So there's hints.
I hope it's
and
another
a
water
possibility.
tower.
Yeah.
Yeah, the water tower.
So there's hints and evidence that could support that, but it's by no means confirmed.
Exactly. It's just basically subtle things here and there. Again, like, there's another thing as well, that if it were for a tower, we will see like huge foundations being piled into that square. We haven't seen that. Like, yes, it has the shape of a square. It sort of has the same size of a tower, but we haven't seen that work of like having huge foundations going into the ground, as we've seen with this tower and the tower at 39A. That's sort of one of the really like really remarking things of building these towers, that the first thing that you see is heavy foundation work on the ground, and that is not something that we've seen in that location.
Gotcha. Another gifted membership coming here, Drew Nar gifting a Red Team membership, so appreciate that support, and hope whoever has received the membership enjoys the perks.
Yeah, I think that was Nick.
Oh, was it? Yeah, I saw Nick and Sweeney, our own NSF photographer, got gifted a Red Team membership, so there you go.
Is that a paradox?
Yeah,
he's now got access. He's now got access to his own photographs.
Yeah.
It all comes down to, if you're watching, just be active on chat, and whenever someone gives you, whenever someone gives memberships, it usually goes to randomly people that are active in chat. So, the more you interact, the more chances that you get the gifted membership. Right. I got them as well.
Yeah, I know, Alex, you got one too. But anyway, let me see what else we got here. Here we go. Sebson asked us, great stream, so thank you. Do you think that we will see a Starship on the West Coast, and when? Vandy gonna get a Starship or something? I mean, is there demand for that? You have a polar corridor from Florida.
Chris, say your thing about point-to-point.
I personally think point-to-point is going to revolutionize the airline industry to the point that everyone will look back and say, wow, did we really spend 10 hours on a plane where we could fly into space and arrive anywhere in the world within like 60 minutes? I'm gonna stick with this thought process until I die, because I honestly think that is the way forward. But everyone goes, but Chris, it's not going to happen for like 20 years. Well, I personally hope it does, because I think that I would personally love to fly on a Starship, to go to KSC to watch a Starship launch to Mars.
There you go. I mean, think about it. I mean, however many years ago there was months spent on a boat to get across an ocean, and now we got planes that are only a couple hours. Is the next step only a few minutes on a rocket? But yeah, I mean, so if that comes to fruition, then obviously you're gonna have a lot of places where you have Starships launching and landing, including on the West Coast. If you look at it from a perspective of orbital launches, and you're looking at launching satellites or whatever, is Starbase and Kennedy Space Center sufficient for Starship operations, or do you think a kind of dedicated site such as at Vandenberg to access those kind of orbits, either polar or retrograde and stuff like that, would that be of merit, or would they rather just centralize those operations and fly to polar trajectories from Cape Canaveral, for example?
Will they lose your luggage? Just saying. It ends up floating in space or something.
It's like you get those app updates. We lost your luggage on the moon. We'll get it back to you as soon as we can.
Yep, we put it on our own ship. It's going to Mars now. We'll get it back to you in 2 years.
Here's a question from Tyler saying, super heavy into orbit to use as an orbital fueling station. I've seen a couple people saying this in chat. I think chat severely underestimates the technical complexity of just launching a super heavy straight into orbit. That's not easy to do. It's not designed to operate as an SSTO. It would need almost all of its propellant, so you don't get a super heavy fill with propellant on orbit. You have to then go fill it with something else. It's why ships are designed to be the on-orbit refueling vehicles. But anyway, let's get into a recap of the testing that we've seen so far happen today. So it was propellant loading testing. When we started our coverage, they were getting frosty on the booster. We saw both tanks on the booster get frosty. And based on the ground support equipment that we saw spool up and things like that, excuse me, we believe that it was actually methane and liquid oxygen. They had the methane recondensers active and things like that. And so it looked like actual propellant loading rather than just a nitrogen like cryoproof, and which makes sense because they've done a lot of those tests before. Doesn't seem to be necessary for them to do more of those. So they got into that on the booster. We also saw an engine chill vent from the ship. It connects from the ship to the booster, but it's venting from the ship. That indicated that they loaded a little bit of propellant onto the ship because they were conducting engine chill. We then also saw that Q-D that we see on this current camera view disconnect. There was a test of the Q-D retract. Not the arm didn't swing away or anything, but just the Q-D plate retracted. And then they went and reconnected that. As you can see, it's currently connected. So they did some testing there. And those are the kind of milestones we saw here. Right now, we're still seeing the orbital launch mount venting, which is usually a purge vent of some kind. It could indicate both the ending of testing or the starting of testing, so it's not exactly indicative of what's going on. But we know while it's venting, they're not actively loading anything. But other than that, yeah, we're kind of waiting to see if they're going to move into another test here. Oftentimes here at Starbase, they will complete one test, detank the vehicle, and then move into a new test. So that's the possibility that we're looking at right now. But right now, unclear whether that's the direction they're going. Did I miss anything, Alex?
Yeah, the tower is also venting like very faintly, but it's also...
Oh, a little bit?
Yeah, just a little bit.
And that's similar to the orbital launch mount vent, except it applies to the ship Q-D connection rather than the booster connection.
And just as as I said before, like many minutes ago when we started, that OLM vent indicates that they are not loading things. It also means that they are not draining. So the same pipes that they use for loading propellants, they are also for draining. They are actually called like fill and drain pipes for a reason, and it is because they are also used for draining. And so whenever you see that venting, it's mostly because they are purging and things like that, and so it obviously means that there's no propellant passing through that pipe, and so it's either not going into the vehicle or not coming from the vehicle, so there's nothing passing through right now. And sort of that's the thinking that right now they are just holding. Whenever that OLM vent goes, it's just holding. It's not either going in or going out. It's just there.
Well, we're also hearing some venting every once in a while. We haven't heard a huge depressed vent or anything yet, but
which also indicates usually the end of testing, or at least of the first round of testing. Sometimes they repressurize, they retest again, and things like that. But usually, when they do a detank, they then do a depress as well, and that usually makes the whole rocket go crazy and be saved for people to come in.
Yeah, I gotcha. Also, quick question we got one in chat asking about yesterday. I know we were watching for potential testing yesterday. Don't think they ever really got into the testing field. Did they do any testing yesterday, Alex, that we could see?
Seemed like they scrapped right as they were about to load things on the vehicles. It seems like mostly they got the vehicles pressurized and things like that, but they didn't seem to go into propellant load like they did today. So progress. They did more progress today. It is not unheard of, or it is not really unusual for them, especially when they have these downtimes, like they have done for 2 months almost, where they have replaced a lot of pipes on the OLM. They have reordered things and things like that. It is not unheard of, and it is very completely normal for them that the first time they actually go into testing, they just simply go into trouble, they trip over things, and they're like, oops, we might need to try again tomorrow, right? And that's when they actually go in and have a successful fill of the tanks and all that, as we're seeing right now.
Right.
And that's quickly, can I
go
just
ahead.
quickly mention a super chat from a Kyle Moranis. He wondered why his message vanished. It's got message retracted, so either you pressed the wrong button somewhere, or it had a word in there which tripped Nightbot. I don't know how that. It's not a moderator action, I know that much. So if you can repeat the message you had in your super chat, just as a normal chat, I'll make sure it's added to the queue. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Chris. Also, people mentioned that it was windy yesterday too, which could be a factor. It was pretty windy today too, but I think even windier yesterday, and that could be a constraint on something potentially. But hard to know that for sure. Also, keeping an eye on the ground support equipment. Oftentimes, that is the indicator of propellant loading and stuff like that. Where, oh yeah, we're seeing that vent. Thank you. All right, so Kevin was looking and found that vent we keep hearing. It's that small tank, kind of in the center to the right of your screen, tall white tank that vents every once in a while. Long shot, Alex. Do you have any? Do you know what tank that is?
Yeah, that seems to be related with the nitrogen system of the tank farm, basically.
Okay.
They use a lot of, while the vehicles don't use nitrogen right now in this testing, the tank farm uses a lot of it for pressurization, for liquid nitrogen, for the subcoolers and things like that. So there's a lot of that, and usually they have to vent it out, and that's what we're seeing there. That tank used to hold the tower where all the loudspeakers were for PA announcements, but they removed that a couple of months ago. I don't know even where the new one is located. I haven't really looked it up, but yep.
Gotcha. Thank you. So that's just and those are probably maintenance vents, just maintaining the certain pressure that's supposed to be in that tank. We got a question here from Simon asking, if an accident were to happen at Starbase, would the Cape be a viable testing facility, or does the program have to be fully tested at Starbase before NASA would allow operations at the Kennedy Space Center? Chris, do you think they could do significant R&D at KSC, or is that too risky?
Yeah, it's a very good question. By the way, metal prints sold. Woo! I've got a wall of metal prints right now, and they're fantastic. They really are. KSC, I think, it's a perfect scenario right now where they've got Starbase for development and testing, and that's what Elon has said is Starbase's role, and that's why we'll be launching a crazy amount. It'll still be launching a lot, but not a crazy amount. And that makes sense to shake out the system before they then start launching from KSC, because they want success from KSC. A mishap at KSC is bad because of 39A. You don't want anything bad happening there. So if something bad happened at Starbase, would they then make development and testing at KSC? my spidey senses say that I don't think that the authorities involved would like that too much. I think they would probably try and find a quick solution to repairing Starbase. Hopefully it's not too bad, and continuing from there. But yeah, it's a really good question. I'm going to ask some of the KSC guys I know about that. So leave that with me.
Alright, we'll have to get back to you on that then. We got a lot of orders from the shop also. Thank you for the shop
Yeah,
support.
people are currently ordering a lot of things.
Stocking up. Another question here from Sean asking, what's happening with Phobos and Deimos lately? Those are the two converted oil rigs, or I guess oil rigs to be converted that SpaceX purchased. We haven't heard much about them. Do we know anything about the fate of sea launch in Starship's future?
Well, I haven't heard anything as well. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of activity, at least from satellite pictures. I'm not even sure if we've seen like aerial shots from nearby or things like that. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of things happening with them, so we'll see. I'm not really sure.
I wish I could put this this WhatsApp on screen. I did ask one of the KSC guys who was online right now, and he goes, "No chance in hell."
Well,
So I think that they don't want starships crashing around the place.
alright, so R&D's got to happen in Texas then, at least from that one person. That's funny. But yeah, on the topic of those sea launch platforms, which by the way, Sean, thank you for the support in asking this question. The last official was that they're basically a very low priority. The land-based launch sites are coming first between Starbase and then KSC. And so, I mean, part of it is expected that we wouldn't hear much from Phobos and Deimos, and that'll come up more when they're getting closer to actually working on them more seriously and getting them online. But it could also be a sign that they may be de-scoping it entirely and then going the other direction and saying maybe we don't need sea launch platforms, or at least not for a very long time. But, you know, the absence of news, we can only speculate. Let's see what other questions we've got here. Still waiting on, still that same tank is stealing the show right now by venting over and over again. The Starship and Super Heavy seem to be done right now.
See, the problem of where the new roadblock is located. Oh, thanks, Kevin. I was just thinking about that.
There you go.
He read my mind. The problem with that road closure location, like that new one, is that all of those bushes get in the way. We cannot really see if there's like a tent or things like that. We usually are like gauging whether that road closure is gonna be open soon or not with all the action that goes there. Usually they even have like their own tent going on there, sort of like a picnic kind of thing. But yeah, it's hard to say. There's still at least what I could say maybe 3-4 cars there. One of them with the lights. One of the police cars there as well. So it's hard to tell whether they're gonna be opening that soon or not.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't seem like anytime soon, at least. But we'll see. We'll keep having an eye on this. It's certainly those things where you don't want to just wrap up and then suddenly they start happening, like things start happening again when we get clowned by SpaceX.
Well,
yeah.
So on that front, when we don't know, you know, really what the fate of this is, I mean, for those who've been watching for the last few minutes, it's been pretty evident that activity on the vehicle has been spooling down. They're still detanking this, and I think basically here's what I think we're gonna do. Obviously, we've got 24/7 cameras over on Starbase Live. You can always be watching this, but I think we're gonna spool down the commentary. We'll end this dedicated stream for now. Nothing much else going on later today, so if testing were to spool back up and we need to providing some commentary updates again, we will go live again. We have the ability to do that, but right now I think we're going to spool down the commentary and we'll leave it to the 24/7 cameras, because I think we're just a little no evidence that they're getting into testing at least anytime soon, and we're of course expecting testing to continue into next week anyway. But I think we're going to take this opportunity to hand it off to the robot cams, let them do their job, and we'll throw you all over to Starbase Live to keep an eye on the testing if it continues, and we can finish up any commentary if they spool up testing again later. Really quick, Tim W. You got the last super chat in here is actually a gifted membership. So Tim gifting a Red Team membership, we greatly appreciate that support. Everyone that has sent in support via asking questions, super chats, memberships, things like that, stopping by the shop, we greatly appreciate it. Thanks for supporting what we do. Thanks for tuning in. And we're going to hand it off to the robot cams. Really quick, the voices you heard on commentary, we had Alex on comms today. Alex, thanks for hopping on so far.
Well, thanks for having me as well. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely, the pleasure is ours. Chris Bergen also hopped on commentary with us today. Chris, thanks for hopping on and wrapping up the coverage with us.
I had it easy. I'm only on 45 minutes.
Oh, well, we appreciate it all the same. Appreciate that. Also, big thank you to Kevin in the background who was operating today's stream. So, Kevin, appreciate that support. Also, a shout out to all of the robot cameras who, as Dos does point out in the back channel, it's not like they get a break when we spool up commentary. So, they've been doing their job the whole time, and we appreciate what the robots do. But my name is Thomas Burkhardt. We're going to be signing off for now. We're going to head on over to Starbase Live, and we'll spool up more commentated coverage the next time SpaceX spools into full stack testing. But until then, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.